Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Half Moon Bay Planning Commission of Thursday, May 14th. We'll get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, we have one planning commissioner calling in from offsite, Rick Hernandez. But with that, we can go into roll call.
All right, Commissioner Hernandez is teleconferencing. Commissioner Polgar. Here. Commissioner Reddick. Vice Chair Benjamin.
Here.
And Chair Holt.
Here.
Everyone is present.
Okay. So with that, we can move to the approval of minutes. We have minutes from April 23rd, 2019. Anybody have any comments or want to make a motion on the minutes?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, thank you.
Approved. Okay, with that, go into our public comment period. Opportunity for the public to provide comments on items not on the agenda. If you wish to speak, you need to submit a little green card. I don't have any green cards. I don't see anybody jumping up wishing to make public comments, so we will close the public comment period and move into our first public hearing item, coastal development permit for 623 Church Street. And that is Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. This project involves the construction of a one-car garage. Let's see, move to the next slide. And partially within the rear yard setback, as well as the removal of a large Douglas fir tree that's partially within the proposed footprint of the detached garage. The permits requested include a coastal development permit, architectural review, and a variance to encroach into the rear yard setback. The existing house on the site, as shown in this photograph, a little bit on the back there, was constructed in 1930, and the original detached garage was demolished in 1995. So this slide shows the site and surrounding area just before the library across the street was completed. You also have Cunha Middle School off to the west there, across Church. This slide indicates the proposed site plan. And first, focusing on the variance request, notice that the new garage is within 5 feet of the rear property line, as dimensioned over here. With respect to the site design and site plan, the garage footprint is much smaller than the main house, as you can see. Space between the house and the garage allow continued views of the potentially historic home, and the driveway strips certainly highlight the positive design of the detached garage, in regard to stormwater management and aesthetics. The floor plan on this next slide, you'll notice that there is a restroom included with the single-car detached garage. And we know that some of the commissioners have asked for the potential to convert this to an accessory dwelling unit. And that is a possibility in the future if the owner does decide to go that route. We had several discussions with the owner and architect, and at this time they have no desire to establish an accessory dwelling unit. They just want a one-car garage with a restroom and laundry facility. They have been informed, and if in the future they decide that they'd like to establish an accessory dwelling unit in the detached garage, they would need to provide one additional off-street parking space. But that is something they could pursue in the future with an administrative coastal development permit. And then this slide indicates the front or the street-facing side elevation facing south towards the new library. Notice the carriage doors, a little bit more decorative than your average garage door. I've also provided the commission with a colors and materials sample. And then this slide indicates the interior elevation that faces the existing house. A little summary of the policies associated with the review of this project. As far as the development standards go, the site is within the commercial downtown, and when you have a single-family residence, the R1 standards apply, and the project conforms to all the R1 standards besides the rear yard setback. The findings can be made for the requested variance based off the existence of a large elm tree off to the side. They've placed the garage footprint further away from the elm tree to preserve it. And they've also provided a tree protection plan that's associated with one of the 2 arborist reports that were submitted. Justification can be made for the removal of the Douglas fir tree that's partially within the footprint. And one of the arborist reports provides justification on that. The site is adjacent to a visual resource area, and thus the old downtown standards would apply. We have updated the draft resolution to indicate the findings and criteria associated with the old downtown standards, which we feel that this project can be made. Let's see, and then the downtown specific plan does have policy for planting and preserving existing trees, as well as preserving historic buildings. We are confident that this project is in conformance with the downtown specific plan. The detached garage is compatible with the existing house on the site as far as roof pitches, gables, horizontal siding similar to the existing house, colors and materials that are compatible. The project is categorically exempt from CEQA, fits nicely into the section 15303E, construction of accessory structures. In summary, we suggest the Planning Commission ask any clarifying questions, hold a public hearing, deliberate, and we recommend approval of the project.
Great, thank you very much. Any clarifying questions from the Planning Commission? Commissioner Polgar.
I just wanted to clarify in terms of, there's currently the fence that goes across where the driveway is going to go. Will there be any fence in that area? I couldn't really tell from the, or will it just be an open driveway?
What the owner would like to do is remove the existing fence where the site posting is placed currently, and extend the existing picket fence a little ways towards the new driveway. Let's see.
Any other clarifying questions? Anything further?
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Benjamin.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. First,
One last point, Mr. Chair. The applicant is here, architect of record, to answer any clarifying questions as well.
so first, while I have the mic, I want to apologize for being a few minutes late this evening. Hope you'll bear with me. I'll try not to make that happen very often. So thank you for the answers to the questions. I appreciate them. They were very helpful. I did have just a couple of other questions on my second reading. One was the staff report indicates that it would have a washer and dryer connection. A dryer connection is typically a 35 amp branch circuit. A garage, since we normally expect garages to be wired for electric vehicles, would be a NEMA 1450, it would be a 50 amp circuit. So I just wanted to get clarification that we're looking at a 50 amp circuit for the garage for an electric vehicle, or what in this case may be the, well, tell me about the wiring in a little more detail if you could.
It's my understanding that they would not be required to rough in the electrical for an electric vehicle charging station, but if that's building a new garage, it might make sense. But to my knowledge, just for a garage construction, they would not be required to. Alternatively, if it was, say, if it was a new house, then yes, they would need to rough in the,
I see.
you know, the.
Okay, well, we'll follow that. I'll be interested in the perspective of my colleagues on that. And I also really appreciated the arborists' report. They were very helpful for a guy like me who loves nature but doesn't understand the science of being an arborist. When I read the conditions on the coastal development permit, I was sort of looking at condition A6 and thinking that would be where we would impose the requirement to implement the recommendations in the arborist report, but I couldn't find it. And I'm thinking maybe I looked in the wrong place, and if not, whether staff would support a change to require that the arborist's recommendations be followed.
Of course we would. We're going to take a look and see if we missed it, but I think you can hold that for your motion.
More likely I missed it than you missed it, but
No.
just
I'm not sure.
C13. Okay, I'll go dig that up while we're doing the public hearing. Thank you very much. No further questions.
Any other additional questions? Commissioner Hernandez, any questions from you?
I'm good, thank you. This is just a comment. I like the thoughtfulness on the design. I think does a really good job of blending in. It's from an architectural review perspective. I think it more than satisfies the desires we have to blend into the community.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, we can open up the public comment period, public hearing. I don't have any green cards on this one. I don't see anybody wishing to speak, so we can close the public comment period and bring it back to commission discussion.
Thanks. So I think C13, this concerns the observing the tree protection measures. That certainly covers the construction period. My impression was that there was also advice about protecting the vicinity of the tree after construction, and I want to be sure that we don't lose those.
Okay, we'll let's stop.
Otherwise, I think it's a fine project, and I'm in support of the project.
Commissioner Reddick, Commissioner Polgar. Jump out.
I'd earlier asked Scott a question via email about the parking situation. He pointed out to me that we gained potentially 2 off-street parking areas by virtue of this project if a second car can fit in the driveway between the garage and the street. So Commissioner Polgar's question about the fence is relevant to that, but I'm assuming that whatever is done with the fence will potentially allow a second car parked off street in the driveway. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So.
That's a good thing.
Okay, anything else? You have anything?
Yeah, I'm supportive of it. I think that the look and design match well with the existing house. And I actually asked that question about the fencing in hopes that it would actually be more open so that the view of the garage would be, I think it's a nice looking structure there. And it was my understanding reading the tree report that there were design features like bumping out the curb or the sidewalk was a way of protecting the roots. And so it looked like that was incorporated in the design already. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. And They're also integrating pervious pavement into the driveways for use in the driveway strips.
And they're using like those two driveway strips, yeah, okay.
Through the chair.
Vice Chair.
Yeah, so I appreciated those changes, and I did see them as an implementation idea for the arborist report. They also had a section where they were discussing the pruning in 5-year, a period. And I didn't, I'm not trying to lay out each of the terms of the report. I'm just thinking that language that says we're going to do what the report says rather than try to pick a few off might be sufficient. And I also am interested in whether you think it would be worth inquiring of the applicant whether at this stage of construction, when it's relatively inexpensive, we might propose adding a branch circuit to support electric vehicles in that garage. If they ever convert it to an ADU, they're going to want that power anyway. Thank you.
Jill, did you want to respond to the question on the arborist?
Sure. Regarding ongoing tree protection, because the tree is a heritage tree, it already will enjoy the protections of the Heritage Tree Ordinance, which limits pruning to no more than a third in a reasonable period of time. That would include also damage to the root zone. One thing you could do is have some kind of a condition for monitoring that in a couple of years we just confirm that the health of the tree is what it should be following. You got to give it a year after the stress of construction. We'd recommend that. That's kind of arborist rule of thumb. But really the site design was intended to allow the tree to be maintained well. It's kind of that affordable by design sort of approach that it's cooked in. We're feeling pretty good about that. But if you want to cite the tree ordinance or cite some kind of a monitoring, that would be fine.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not looking for any specific prescriptive addition. I just want to be sure we have the follow-up. Similarly, I suppose that the fruit trees that are being planted on the east side of the property, I think it was the east side, maybe it was the north side, that they are, they have to be established. That is we have general principles in our conditions that require that landscaping be established. They're protected under that condition. Is that correct?
Yes, and for the one-for-one replacement of the removed Douglas fir tree as well.
Okay, and so your second question, if we'd like to hear from the applicant, if you want to respond to the question regarding wiring. Would the architect like to speak to that and the willingness to incorporate? Solid green. Make it solid green, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners and staff. I'm Ed Love, architect here in Half Moon Bay, and the architect for the Wade Garage. Your question about the 220 possible charging station for an electric car in the future? 50 amp, 220 volts, yes. There's going to be 220 in there, so that's probably a good idea while they're doing it. And I guess that would be up to Neil Wade if he wanted to do that. He might be amenable to it, but we'll certainly take it up with him. Makes perfect sense.
But what you're saying is it'd be wired to accommodate that in the future. And that's what you're looking for, so we're all good. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, so with that, I have no further comments and happy to entertain a motion. Go for it. Don't all jump up at once.
Okay, I approve, I move that we approve the PDP 17053 based on the findings and evidence contained in Exhibit A of the draft resolution and subject to the conditions of approval in Exhibit B with the addition of a 50 amp wire, 50 amp 220 volt wiring connection for the garage, and boy, I'm kerflumped here, so I'm trying to get the monitoring condition for the tree.
I think what I heard from staff was just sort of a reference to our existing heritage tree ordinance should be sufficient.
Thank you. And the addition of a reference in the conditions to adhering to our heritage tree ordinance. Thank you.
Okay, second? We have a second?
I'll second it.
All right. Sorry, he beat you to it, Rick. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, approved. Moving on to our second item, item 1B, coastal development permit for 520 Kelly Avenue, Bike Works project. Turn that over to Doug Garrison. And for those in the public, if you do wish to speak, please fill out a green card and get them over to us.
Good evening. For the record, I'm Doug Garrison, the project planner. A little bit of housekeeping. We did receive some comments, questions from individual planning commissioners. Those we've responded to in a memo that was distributed to the planning commissioners this afternoon. It's available to the public if they would like to see it. One of the commissioners did point out a typo in the staff report. That's on page 8. It's in the discussion of parking. The zoning code section referenced was 18.30020. It turns out that has something to do with converting mobile home parks. The correct citation is 18.36020. I would also note that the applicant, the architect is here. He has a presentation on some of the design issues that I'm not really going to delve into. So for this project, a little bit of background for people who haven't been following it. It's on Kelly Avenue, right next to the Boys and Girls Club gym. It's project that a little bit of a difficult site because of the historic Victorian on the front of the lot that many people are familiar with, as well as the 100-foot tall pine tree out there. And so there was quite a bit of work that went into this. The preliminary design started under a different architect in 2017. They submitted the application in 2018. At some point, they changed architects. We've looked at many different design layouts and different building designs. So the current project, it's a mixed-use building. It's to the rear of the existing Victorian. It has Bike Works is the business in the Victorian. They'll be moving into the ground floor and basement of the new building. And there will also be 4 apartments upstairs. The apartments will have 4 dedicated garage spaces. In total, there'll be 15 shared parking spaces for a total of 19. The historic building will be leased to new tenants. Have not been identified yet as far as I know, but some of the uses we've discussed and analyzed included retail, office, or perhaps a small cafe or wine bar type of use. Some of the significant features on the site, there's proposed a new parklet in the northeast corner. There are 2 plazas, multi-use areas that can be used for a variety of different uses on the property. Right, with potential of a cafe going in, one new addition to the Victorian is a ground level deck in front of the building. This is something that could be removed in the future, does not significantly affect the historic integrity of the building. And there is some new landscaping. And so what they're required as far as permits is a coastal development permit for the new building, use permit for residential use in the downtown district. The other uses, the retail, office, or cafe, wine bar, those are all permitted by right, would not require a use permit. A parking exception, and architectural and site design. As we discussed, there's a number of constraints to this site. There have been multiple revisions. In last October 2018, we came to the Planning Commission for a study session to go over the basic concepts of the project, some of the constraints and the approach to development. So this was just a Google Street View photo that fortuitously has a person on a bicycle in front. And the camera is probably a little bit higher than a typical person on the street would be because it's the camera on top of the Google car. But one of the things that stands out is there's not a lot of visibility of this property from the street. And for retail, you usually want it up close to the street. You want nice, clear line of sight, nice interface. In this case, we have a 100-year-old Victorian building. We have a 100-foot tall Norfolk pine tree there. And you can also see the area around the tree is basically asphalt paving. The entire lot essentially has been paved except for this little part in front of the building. And so that's one of the issues we were working with the different designs, was to figure out how to make sure for the economic success that it would be visible to people, and also how to work around the historic structure and the pine tree. You can see the gym just on the left side. That's built basically right up to the property line. That's another constraint here. From bird's eye view, you can see the entire lot has been paved in asphalt, I believe around 2003 or 4 before this owner purchased the property. And you can see they've sort of outgrown the Victorian building by the storage containers out there. I don't know what day of the week Google took this photo, but looks like there's maybe 5 cars in the parking lot. You can see the gym is right up to the property line. As you look to the west, these are older wood frame buildings, a little bit lower profile. I think the ones up front were residential. They're now commercial. The ones a little bit further back were more industrial, barns, workshops, that sort of thing. And then this lot behind here, there's a barn and some other structures that's used by various artists to produce pottery and that sort of thing. And there's a shared access to all of those properties along this side. As far as the street goes, it's pretty eclectic. Going east, you have the gym, Cunha Intermediate School, gas station on the corner. You have the government complex here, basically across the street. So there's no real cohesive design theme here. It's a little bit of everything. And so we were looking at a parking exception. We had a building design that was probably more modern than people in Half Moon Bay were used to. There were just questions we wanted to get some guidance on. So we came to the Planning Commission on October 9th with a conceptual plan. It wasn't completely fleshed out. And we wanted some feedback on the mix of uses that could go in there. Those are relevant to how much parking might be required, so we wanted to fill out the comfort with a parking exception, what would be acceptable, what might push the envelope a little bit. The basic site plan layout, some of the amenities, the little parklet on the street corner, that sort of thing, and sort of the mass and location of the building, how that fit in. So this was the site plan that we brought to the study session. And you can see the new building would be, oops. Directly behind the Victorian, a rectangular sort of linear approach. We looked at T-shaped buildings, L-shaped buildings, flipping them around the other direction. We had parking behind them, parking beside it. We had a lot of scenarios, and this seemed to work the best for the applicant. The site plan has good circulation. The fire marshal liked this. It was easy for the fire trucks to get in and out. Gives them better access to the lots that are landlocked behind this property. And a couple of the features that everybody seemed to like were this new little parklet that's between the tree and the sidewalk. This is the area that's currently paved over with asphalt. This area between the buildings could serve as vehicle access. Delivery trucks could come in one way, go out the other way, wouldn't have to turn around in there. But it's flexible enough because there's two-way ingress and egress from both driveways. This could be blocked off for special events, community gatherings, things like that. And trying to squeeze as many parking spaces in as we could. This site had 4 angled spaces in front of the Victorian that backed up pretty much directly to the sidewalk. There were also a couple parallel spaces squeezed in along the sides of the building, and trying to get it up to, under different designs, we'd had as many as 25 spaces. And so one of the questions was, how do you feel about parking? And it was pretty unanimous. The commissioners wanted to see these spaces in front of the Victorian go away. They just didn't seem to work there with the historic building, as well as backing up near the sidewalk and other reasons. They did like the plaza. They did like the parklet. We didn't really get into landscaping or the architectural details because we wanted to get the big questions answered before the applicant spent more money. So the architectural details are really more of a massing study. And so this shows the existing building is 32 feet high, the new building roughly the same height. The gym behind it, which frames everything, is 47 feet tall, and the tree itself, which is too tall to fit in this, is about 100 feet tall. And so some of the feedback we got from the commission was they liked the public amenities, they liked the plaza, the parklet. They thought the sort of more modern design was okay because of the gym, which sort of overwhelms everything in this block, that it was kind of a nice intermediate step between the gym and the other properties. They did indicate that they wanted to see more detail on the building's materials, the design details, the balconies, the windows, to make sure that it was just going to be a really nice looking building that wasn't sort of a new version of the blank wall that's the gym. And so that essentially they said the architecture is okay, but we want more detail. Parking, we'll support a parking exception if we get some real public benefit out of that with the plazas and better pedestrian access into the site, that sort of thing. One thing that was kind of surprising but unanimous was everybody said that, Kelly Avenue is a major gateway into downtown, and we have no policies or design guidelines for how to treat that area, and it was something the city should undertake. And that's beyond the scope of this project, although I do think with the revised project there are some factors that address that. And so with the new site plan. You can see the basic configuration with the building located behind the Victorian is about the same. The main changes are up front. Where the parking spaces are gone. There's a second plaza up here. There's a low profile deck, ground level deck in front of the Victorian, which would be well served if there's a cafe in there. And also this plaza, it could be used for vehicles, but it's also would be a nice place for some tables for the cafe. It's a place where kids learning how to ride a bike can sort of toddle around on the property without getting in too much mayhem. And there are some additional public space here with some tree planting, some benches, pretty significant change. These trees have been added along the side here. The concrete walkways there, a little bit better defined as we discussed with a colored or textured surface that connects clearly to the street. Pedestrians know where to go. They feel separated from traffic. The trees help with that. All of the asphalt will be torn up. It'll be replaced with permeable paving material. So those are the key differences from what we looked at before. And I'll defer on the architectural design to the architect, Mr. Grunow, but just in kind of a bird's eye view, you can see some key features. The front of the building, lots of glass, big balconies. Each apartment has 2 balconies, one upstairs and downstairs. The glass is important in that this building is difficult to see from the street. So for people looking in, they're not going to see very much of the building. What they see needs to have to stand out to draw people's attention that there is a business back there. So on this corner here, that's where the rental bicycle business will be focused. They'll have lots of colorful bikes parked out front, maybe a creative artistic signage. It's not going to have the typical signage you'd get for a CVS drugstore or something. It's going to have to be a little more subtle, something that just psychologically draws people into the activity. So that's part of the design. Does have really large solar voltaic array on the roofs here. If you look along the side of the building, I do have a material sample. I'll give that to you. Also, the windows have these shrouds that protrude out. It does provide a fair amount of articulation to what would otherwise be a pretty blank wall. I think that does help. So the applicant did put up story poles 2 weekends ago. And I've got a few photos. I think most of you have probably had a chance to take a look. This is from Highway 1. From here you can see the top of the building is well below the gym. As you're looking northeast, kind of fits in there between the gym and the Victorian with the lower profile buildings on the rear here. When you consider the muted gray building materials, it's going to be well framed by the surroundings. Actually, let me get you the material. And this one is almost directly across the highway. You can see the entire building is framed by the gym. And I would point out that where the netting is, that's all the way to the end of the overhangs over the balconies. So that's a conservative approach that probably overstates the main massing of the building, which will actually be a little bit smaller than that. As you move to the north side of Kelly Avenue on Highway 1, again, you can see it in here, but it's pretty well nestled in between the other buildings and the gym. from south of Kelly, there's a fairly short window, maybe 100 feet or so. Just because of the perspective, the building does appear to extend out to the south, would obscure parts of the hillside behind here. In this case, it looks like it's above the hillsides, but I think that's the fog, not actually quite the top of the hill. But again, this is a fairly short area. And again, if you're eastbound on Kelly, you would see something like this. From Kelly, across from the gym, looking down, again, you can see it's pretty well nestled in here. From the other driveway, it's a little bit more open, doesn't have the pine tree, it'll be a little more visible. That's sort of the key. That's why they want the rental over there, the things that people can see down the driveway. So I'm not going to get into the findings because there are pages and pages of findings in the resolution. But the main issues here were compliance with coastal development permit requirements, use permit, the parking exception, design review, and CEQA. And we did a pretty thorough analysis for conformity with the general plan, the local land use plan, zoning code. Those findings are in the resolution in detail. Also, architectural and site design findings. The parking section was a little convoluted. We think it meets the letter of the law as far as the zoning requirements. I think on most days the parking will be fine. If there's a big Saturday, a big sale, things going on, they are probably going to have some overflow parking. We don't anticipate that would be a daily issue. Historic resources, we evaluated the project for compliance with the city standards as well as the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. Now we've taken a look at the landscaping and the personal amenities for the tenants that would be required under our zoning. Meets all of those requirements for open space. With the addition of perhaps a cafe and those decks, it would be quite a nice place from a personal amenity standpoint. The landscaping is a little bit limited, and that's in part by design, that we want clean line of sight in from the, typically with landscaping you're trying to hide buildings. In this case we're trying to make people see the building. The project has addressed, from an engineering standpoint, stormwater. The original application did have all the C3 checklist requirements. Because of the changes to the site plan that's being updated, I would note that since the entire lot is essentially asphalt and that'll be replaced with permeable pavement, there will be an improvement. The area along the south and east side of the property does include some bioswales, that sort of bioretention, and city engineer is confident that this works to meet all of our standards. And so staff's recommending that you find the project categorically exempt from environmental review, squarely fits within the infill exemption, 15.332, as well as existing facilities, 15.301, and new construction, 15.303, and then approve the coastal development permit, the use permit, the parking exception, and the design review. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions. Also, Mr. Grunow does have some slides to show us how they work through the design process on this.
Great, thank you, Doug. So unless there are any burning questions at this point, I think it would be prudent to hear from the project architect.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm Stuart Grunow, architect for this project, Half Moon Bay Bike Works. I think, this will be a little tour of the design process, where we've been for the study session, and how we came to some of the aesthetic decisions that drove the program, or program drove the aesthetic decisions, and we had fun, so hopefully this is enjoyable. So when I came onto the project, we had this, this was the original kind of programmatical design. We had a zero lot line orientated east and west on the site. You see here there was some problems with garages backing out, circulation. There was a number of positive things though. Parking along the zero lot line on the east side, circulation around the Victorian. So we went from there and tried, this was in the study session, we went from there and tried a number of schemes that, just exploration schemes. So we had the big box on the east side of the site so that it was visible from Kelly Avenue, and then the garages were on the east side, accessed through the west side drive that continued on to Bongard's property. Then we tried parking in the rear. That caused problems, circulation around the building, visual security in the rear of the site. It was good for the tenants that their garages were isolated from the rest of the property, but the only security back here was from the residents above. And there was a lot of problems getting around, though this discovery in the design process was positive when we decided to keep going with that. This was the one that really kind of opened eyes to what was possible on the site. Aligning the building behind the Victorian, it provides visual identification from each side of the site. The garages are in a positive space for the tenants. They're able to access their own private entry. Store frontage is on 2 sides of the site, 3 sides of the site. The parking was maintained from the original program, and we had our courtyard in between the 2 buildings. We maxed out the parking, up until the study session, where we were kind of given a pass that, not so much parking was required, and it would be beneficial in exchange for public use, and so the big eye-opener from aligning the building behind the Victorian was, what kind of design party or design metaphor do we use? And, I show this slide, and, it's kind of in jest, but you need something to guide the design. So if you can think of the steam engine as the Victorian building with all its ornate eccentricities and function, and then you have the modular modern industrial revolution behind it. That kind of guided us through the design process. So then we had to look at different configurations of the residential units and the aesthetics of the structure behind the Victorian. So, we tried the linear scheme, offset linear, diagonal in front, pinwheel massing for the residential units, pinwheel with shed roofs, and that brings us back to the site. And then we looked at precedent. What in Half Moon Bay informs the aesthetic decisions that we have made going forward. So there's the senior center housing. There's very nice modern aesthetics and human scale at the street. There's breaking up of the massing on the behind and above, nice use of materials. Of course, the library is a roaring success and a really attractive modern building. We took some cues from there, the angles, the shrouds, and the window boxes, the use of glass. And then we looked at, how does modern and traditional go together? And here we have townhouses with a traditional building. We have different levels of modernism, full modern, kind of postmodern, and then traditional Victorian. So we tried a bunch of different aesthetic schemes. We tried, kind of a more traditional modern with a cornice, hiding some of the mechanical behind, the balconies, the, broken up building panel fenestration. We looked at how that fit on the site. We tried more postmodern, or not postmodern, mid-century modern, with the box sticking out, framing the glass, as well with the shrouds or the boxes on the windows, the nice storefront. That looked a little bit more boring on the site. It didn't have the visual interest that we were interested in to attract people to the site. Then we tried, a little bit more, aggressive or dynamic visual language. We started pulling, creating these angles, pulling out points, creating some volumes. We were attracted to this, but there was still kind of something missing. It didn't have that, it didn't sing, it didn't vibrate, it didn't, it wasn't something necessarily that we could be proud of. It did work on the site. It did what the other schemes did, but it still something was missing, and that brought us to this. We took kind of the best of the mid-century modern. We took the best of the contemporary dynamic. We utilized the balconies. We accentuated the function. We utilized materials. We took some cues from successes that had been achieved in the city or in the town, and we're quite proud of the way it's turned out. Doug alluded to some of the functions of the site. We've really went after all the details, all the programmatic details, sitting areas for storage outside, indoor, outdoor spaces, plaza, bikes, parties. We really envision this as being an active site, bike to it, coffee shop, really a community asset. You see how that works from above. We intend a lot of environmental, ecological amenities, solar panels, radiant floors. That's how it looks from the west, from the parklet. You can see the umbrellas and tables in the front. I'm sure that will, always attracts attention, always attracts a crowd. People want to sit there, This is the shared drive. We've had many discussions with Patricia Roma and the neighbors to the back, Bongards and their tenants, the artistic community. We really envision this as being an artistic center of the community. The tenants are, the tenants, anybody who wants to live in this building is going to be a, I would hope, and have an aesthetic appreciation. Inside, this is the basement. This is the downstairs sales floor. You would after you were upstairs, seeing the displays, seeing the high, the nice models. You come down here, get fitted. This is a 2-story open staircase with some graphics probably on this wall. This is the aesthetic or the accessible entry. This is the rental, repair, and prep. This is bike build stations and repair stations, clean room for suspension, offices for administration. This is storage for the service. These are all tagged and queued. Right now, you probably notice on site they have all those containers. Well, we want to get rid of those containers. We don't have space for containers, and so all that box bikes would be here. So this is the main floor. You see the association, service, sales, soft goods, rental. They all have access through the fire stairs down to the, down to their ancillary spaces. Garages for the residents. Also, I want to point out that now we have two stairs up to the residential level. They have, their main in and out where they come from their garages, but also their pedestrian circulation, so that if they're not in their cars, they can, exit their units and walk out onto the street and into the town. You see how the sunshades work in the early morning. This is the, kind of the artistic interpretation of signage, easily done with bike racks on the walls. They can be taken down and put away. They can locked up. They can be art bikes. They can be sculptures. This is the rear or the south apartment facades. All the apartments have kind of equal footing. There's really not one that's better than the other. It's just one, the ones in the south are looking to the mountains in the south, and it has a broader overhang because sun is in the south, and the one in the overhang in the north is shallower, and we're really considering the Victorian to be the view, and so we're proposing, upgraded color scheme and paint scheme for the Victorian to match this building. You see, these are the second level and the residential units. You walk into each unit, they're the same. You stairs up to the master suite, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, deck, living room. This is a 2-story space here. And then upstairs you have kind of a real generous master suite, nice big bathroom, walk-in closet. You can have offices, bookshelf, lounge, TV, whatever the tenant kind of, however they want to configure it. Then they have a balcony and a kind of a condominium balcony into the living room. This is the proposed second floor residential entrance, some green. We were kind of constrained by space, in order to fit the program. We wanted to put benches and trees and that sort of thing, but so we decided that, we'd build the living walls, some trellises, filter the sunlight, create, utilize the Equitone panels in there. This is the view inside the first floor of the living spaces on the second floor. And this would be the master suite, where I would love to wake up. Roof panels, our elevations. Section, you can see, here's our, kind of display wall, 2-story staircase, bikes down here, bikes up here, service, and this is our open volume in the residential units. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll bring that back to the commission for any clarifying questions at this time. Are there any questions of staff or the applicant, I suppose? None? No? Okay, Commissioner Hernandez, it's time for questions, not comments.
So a couple of things. First of all, I want to applaud you for taking our feedback from the previous meetings we've had and coming up with something very unique. One could almost call this an iconic building. I think this is a fantastic design. And it's very unusual, but it's not meek. You're not meekly going about things, so I applaud you for that. What I do think is meek is the signage on the building. I think you need to do something that communicates to the public that this is a retail business, and I think that the design you have is very thoughtful, but I would encourage you to think through signing that's more clear. I channeled my inner John Evans, our previous planning commissioner, and submitted a concept to you via text and to Bridget and Jill. But I think you need to be a little more aggressive in the signage. You need to communicate that this is a retail business. The other, and so I'm wondering about your thoughts about that. And then I have another question, which I'll just ask now, which is, what are your thoughts on the ventilation in the building? This becomes a passive solar design. I'm concerned that you're not going to have enough good ventilation. You're not going to have enough fresh air moving through the building. So those are the two questions I have from a design perspective, like the signage, what are your thoughts on that, and then the ventilation.
Okay. Want to answer those questions? Sure. Live from Phoenix.
I would agree that, you know, the signage could use a little more thought. You know, we've tried to address a lot of the signage through visual cues, you know, in discussion with staff, and, you know, we were focused on kind of the building and the pedestrian scale and the human scale of, you know, moving through the site, and not so much on the printed word. I think that, you know, the signage would be subtle. You know, we had versions where we printed, you know, Half Moon Bay Bike Works all the way up the building, and, you know, that kind of detracted from the elegance of the structure, or the, you know, it's two-dimensional. So, you know, we would definitely work with staff and in order to develop a signage program that worked with the Victorian and the new structure. Ventilation, you know, I always put a lot of thought into the mechanical and environmental systems. I'm a big proponent of radiant heat. Especially in the residential units. You know, the only problems I've run into with radiant heat in residential construction lately is, you know, in the modern climate of net zero housing, you know, everything's sealed so tight, and, you know, the one thing that's fallen through the gap is air circulation. You know, so we'll have as many operable windows as possible, you know, big walls of operable windows, indoor, outdoor spaces. But, you know, lots of times they make us put in, you know, small package units that move the air around. So we have to have ventilation throughout the space. And they're very small units. You know, we can kind of put them anywhere above bathrooms and have vents into the corridors, into the greater spaces. On the first floor and in the basement, you know, radiant doesn't really work in commercial spaces. So we've purposely made the storefront windows a little bit lower than the bottom of the joists so that we can fit lighting and ventilation, air ducts into that zone. So, you know, we have that planned out, and we have, you know, you see on the roof above the second floor courtyard, we have screening on the front and on the side, or on the top and on the side, and that's where we're going to be putting the package units, the heating and cooling package units, on-demand hot water heaters, that sort of thing. Anything we can't fit in the units themselves.
Very good, thank you.
I had one other clarifying question. The glass front that faces to the south is facing a middle school field. Are there concerns about privacy of the residents and, like, you know, walking around your house and having a bunch of middle schoolers looking up at you? Like, can you walk me through that?
Curtains. No, well, there will have to be window coverings, you know, on any and all windows, probably except for the, you know, the shrouded windows. You know, we're talking about overlapping uses. The school is used during the day. The primary residential uses is presumably at night, though these days it's all the time. You know, there'll be light, those ends will glow at night, so, you know, if somebody was on the field at night, they probably could see into the residential units. You know, then we kind of get into a situation where, you know, civil ordinances, exhibitionism, you know, where's the overlap there? You know, I think the field is actually closed at night, so, you know, the school fields, I think the school goes into lockdown at night and people aren't allowed.
Okay, thank you very much. Did you have a clarifying question?
I did. And I wanted to start by just saying to our... Oh, I'm sorry. Now I'm in. I wanted to say to Commissioners Polgar and Ruddick that you are not bound by the thinking of the commissioners who weighed in before you were sitting here. So if you feel like there's a train that's rolling towards you and you would like to see it go a different direction, I hope that will evaporate and we can hear your thoughts. I wondered if you could point out the emergency exits. I saw the 2 stairs from the residential level, and I thought I saw stairs coming up from the basement, but I wasn't clear on where they were exactly.
Well, I think for the residential units, you know, they would be governed by residential code.
I don't doubt it for a minute. I just wondered where they were, that's all.
Well, primarily the
those two.
balconies.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah. And then where that did come into consideration was in the, I'm going to go the other way. You know, in the commercial space, especially the basement, you know, we had to provide, take into consideration fire egress from the basement. So these would be 1-hour egresses from the basement, and they have to be half the diagonal, more than half the diagonal of the basement space. So that's why they're, you know, typically on opposite ends of the building, because if you take a diagonal through here, you know, basically here, you know, flip that, these doors have to be more than that, half the diagonal. So, you know, that along with the accessible access to the sales floor, you know, I think we've accomplished what code mandates.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any others? Okay, one more question there.
In one of the drawings that, for a previous design, I think it was the one that kind of came out of, or was maybe shown at the study session, on the backside of the building, the new building, there was proposed, it looked like, it was a different design at that point, but it looked like there was some proposed planting. And so I wanted to find out, is there space, or is it right up to the property line, zero, you know, it's okay, but there looked like there was planting along, I guess it's the south side. And I was wondering if there's anything proposed here for this, or there's not space. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a challenging, you can see here that we've tried. We're regulated here, we have to have a 25-foot road, basically turnaround for the fire truck. We're trying to maximize function in here, and as well as, you know, these dimension strings all kind of grow. What this greenery would be, is it enough to, you know, have some height, enable maintenance? You know, there'll be bike boxes coming in and out of here. So we chose to focus kind of on here, almost pave this right to the property line so that it's clean and maintained. There is a fence here right now. You know, in some of the renderings I've shown greenery on the other side of the fence, but that's beyond our control. You know, we've had conversations with the neighbors. They have plans. You know, they intend to make it a nice place, artistic community, sculptures, tile, you know, that sort of stuff.
Is there a possibility on the south west corner of having a bigger tree?
Here?
Yeah, up in there, because it looks like the driveway, I don't know what the egress is for the, you know, I don't know if that's, it's just so, because.
Where our dumpster is?
Well, and it was just wondering about this kind of on this view, because if you go forward, you showed a rendering that was kind of the closest I've seen of an example of what it might look like from Highway 1. Because other than the story poles, we really didn't get a chance to see what it would look like from the kind of this, I guess, is kind of the closest. So just trying to see if there's any, because there's not a lot of articulation. So I was just wondering if there's a way to, you know, have some greenery that would be soft. Because in the previous, for the study session version, that was part, it did look like that was something that was included. And so I was just wondering if there's space for that in this design.
Yeah. You know, in the conversations we've had with Morrow and the group back there, you know, they're talking about, they have a gate, they want site security. You know, as I look at this now and you describe something, you know, I don't particularly want the dumpster to be the gate to their, the arrival point of their property. You know, so, you know, everything back here is pretty tight. I'm not sure that, you know, trees or bushes or, you know, I'd be more concerned about maintenance, but, you know, it's always a challenge to find a spot for this, for the dumpster bins.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I'm going to open up the public hearing. We've got 2 speaker cards here. If anybody else wishes to speak, please fill one out. Our first speaker, Alan O'Driscoll.
Good evening and thank you. A couple quick thank yous. The first one is I'm heavily involved with the Half Moon Bay Soccer Club and the Boys and Girls Club, and I just want to thank the City of Half Moon Bay for their continuing support of those groups. I really appreciate it. The other thank you is to the City of Half Moon Bay as well. John Dowdy, Maz Borginia sitting here, Brian Lee, and the city staff. they've got a really nice community building project right near the Bike Works project. It's less attractive, but they're rerouting the drainage underneath Kelly Avenue to stop the flooding going down Kelly Avenue. It's going to go straight into Pillar-Cedars Creek, the natural flow of drainage. So I want to thank the city for their community building project. It mends a lot of fences when they're not flooding out the school district. So thank you for that. Now, as far as the project itself goes, I heard a comment about signage and visibility and the building hiding behind the Victorian. And my impression was with the story poles, I was driving northbound on Highway 1, I immediately saw the story poles. I was attracted to the project, the size, the scale, the mass. It seemed to fit in, like others have said, maybe Doug, balance. You're kind of stepping up towards the gym. The gym is a large structure, and it kind of looks out of place, to tell you the truth. And this project fits in there beautifully. I was very struck by just the size, the scale, and massing, and the way it fit in there. A couple other things I want to mention. This type of project maintains open space. I live in El Granada. Our views and the natural beauty is very important, and wherever we have opportunities to absorb development in infill areas, I think this is just an ideal choice. We're taking a unused parking lot and we're revitalizing that area. It's kind of quiet and dead back in there. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to take a space between a gymnasium and residential and add some desirability to the city, especially when we talk about Kelly Avenue being an entry to the city. I like the live-work aspect of the project as well. We need housing and we need commerce. I like the basement aspect of the project as well. I've lived my entire life in California and watched the horrific spread of mini storage everywhere. Basements have been frowned upon in California for some reason, and everywhere I go I seem to see strip malls and mini storage, and basements are the solution to mini storage sprawl. Am I out of time?
If you can just wrap it up real quick.
Okay. I like the contemporary design, and the last thing I want to say, I've worked with in this profession, geotechnical profession, for 40 years. I've had the opportunity to work with Stuart Grunow. He's an outstanding architect, and I think he'll be able to answer any questions or tweaks you might have. But as it stands, I think it's a beautiful project, and I hope the city readily approves it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, Mike Alifano.
Hello, my name is Mike Alifano. Thank you, commissioners and city staff for having us here tonight. I'd like to speak in support. By the way, I live at 660 Magnolia, born and raised here on the coast, and have a business on Main Street now for almost 20 years. You know, watching this business grow, Christian's younger than me, but his brother's about my age. Watched the family start the business at Stone Pine and migrate to this building, this historic, landmark, and do a beautiful job maintaining it. I know when they bought it from Mr. Nearhan, I wondered what was going to happen, but I think they did a great job maintaining it. I can speak individually. I'm on the Boys and Girls Club board as well as Alan, but I'm speaking individually about this, that they've been a great neighbor to the Boys and Girls Club when it comes to parking for events. They've been very accommodating to myself and friends and family when we're coming to a basketball game or something like that to allow us to park there, especially obviously when they're not open. I love the aesthetics in the front, the park little setting like that. I think it's going to open it up. I do think Kelly can be a nice gateway into downtown, and I think this will actually open it up and improve the look and the inviting feel. Let's see. I do like the uniqueness of the building. It is definitely a draw to it. It's something that's very different, but also very appealing to me. So I like it. And I also like to see the progression of the design as they went through this process. You don't get to see a lot of that in a lot of building these days. They just seem to go right for code and what they can do and what they can't do, but I like the process in which they've done this. And I love the back and forth that has happened between the commission and what they think might be a good idea and their reaction and forth. So this kind of back and forth, exactly what it's supposed to be. So I applaud both sides of this in this process. But other than that, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, Matt Hagen, if that's correct.
Thank you. My name's Matt Hogan. I been on the coast 35 years. I have run a business on Main Street, and I just want to applaud the forward-thinking concepts here, the modern aesthetic, both to the designer, the architect, and to the staff and council here for considering the project. But I think the value that this provides to the community is not just that it's a cool building to look at. Kelly Avenue is a weird stretch. It is the main, one of the main ways into Half Moon Bay, and you've got a dine thrift store, a funeral home, a gargantuan Catholic church, coin-operated laundry, yet you have probably hundreds of kids and families walking that road every day, and there's just not a lot of value that stretch provides to me as a community member. So the idea of having something here that provides some substance, not just aesthetically, but in terms of a place to sit, have a cup of coffee, I think it's just a great project, and I think along with the Boys and Girls Club, which I applaud as well, this helps to, I guess, take Kelly Avenue into hopefully the next phase of Half Moon Bay and make it a more inviting place to walk and stroll. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That was the last speaker's card I have. So if anybody else wants to speak, wave your hands right now. Otherwise, we'll close that up and we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. I'm going to open it up and just say, reiterate and second Commissioner Hernandez's thanks and appreciation for the work that you all have done and sort of taking our input here. I think you've done a great job. I think the renderings are really nicely done. It's nice to be able to visualize and see that. I think this is, I think it's a good project. I'm going to support it. I think while we don't necessarily know what type of business would operate in the front in the Victorian, I think there's a lot of good opportunity for synergy here between the bike business, a potential cafe there, and really just overall the type of outdoor recreation-based sort of economy that we would love to have here in Half Moon Bay. So I think this does a really great job at advancing that while increasing the amount of housing and living opportunities that we have in the downtown core, which is a key goal of the general plan, and does it in an attractive way. I'll admit when I first saw it, I was skeptical of the train notion. But the idea that ultra-modern building could really work with a historic building. But I've come around on that, and I think there is a tendency to me to want to try to screen the building, either from the school or from the highway. But I get that visibility is really important here, so we do actually want to have a building that makes a statement and draws people off of Highway 1, draws people onto Kelly, and something that's real visible. So I think that's good. I mean, my tendency, like I say, is to want to sort of see landscape screening around it, but I think that's sort of the antithesis of the goal here. I agree with Commissioner Hernandez, though. I think signage, which obviously I'm sure the applicant is also very aware of, is going to be key to draw people in, and just working with just the site as a whole, so this isn't just sort of a back alley business, which I know isn't the intent at all. So perhaps I'm not sure if there's a specific staff approve a specific sign program, if that goes through staff, if you guys would be reviewing that and approving that, but that would be something that I'd certainly entertain considering in the motion, and the architect had indicated that that's what they were intending to do, is working with staff on that. And I do think some more details on the landscaping would be useful, sort of better understanding where some of that is. We have some of the trees sort of ghosted in here. I think it'd be nice to see some of that. I like the concept of the living wall. I don't know if we can't necessarily do that across the whole Boys and Girls Club side, but that'd be nice. But but if just some more articulation in the landscaping plan and having staff be sure to be able to approve that would be great as well. But with that, I'm supportive of the project. I'm sure Jimmy's going to request a electric vehicle charging station somewhere in here. I would support that as well. But with that, yeah. Thank you.
I wanted to thank Commissioner Benjamin for giving me permission to disagree with everything that's happened since October and before, but I actually love this project, and based on Doug's narration of the process that went on in the study session and the reiterations of the design, I think that staff and the applicant's team have done a terrific job. We have housing as a very explicit priority for the city this year and beyond in the downtown area and otherwise. So the mixed use speaks to that. I think Bike Works has been a positive and growing part of the community for a very long time, and what better clean and modern business to have in downtown to spruce up Kelly, as some of the speakers have described. I love the inline design and the opportunity to not only preserve that Victorian house, but even spruce that up with the mini park and such. And of course, as we've already discussed, the beautiful open sight lines from Kelly into the Victorian and the new building, as we see in these renditions, are so nice and so clean. And you have to get the right signage for your business, but you have to preserve those beautiful sight lines as well. Yeah, and I personally love the modern design of the building. I think it's very cool to see the evolution of the Bike Works business into such a space. It's certainly a modern and important industry for us, bike sales and service and rental going forward. A clean business, and the new home will fit it well. So I like everything about it, and I support the project.
Thank you. Commissioner Benjamin?
So thank you for the report, and thank you for the effort that went into the design. And thank you also to the speakers. I want to particularly call out Mr. Hogan. I appreciate, I was struggling to try to describe the aesthetic on Kelly, and you did a really nice job of summarizing it. You missed the Pacific Bell switching station, and it's in a role that plays. It does seem to me that this is a step toward making the space, sort of claiming it an identity that's tied to tourism, that's tied to residences. It was a very insightful remark, and I thank you for it. I appreciated the question about evening lights and how it would be addressed. I would just caution, and I appreciate the architect's response, although I might not be quite as quick to dismiss the possibility that field would become active at night. I think if you ask the people who live up on Silver and North Highlands, who envisioned that had never happened, I think it's worth pausing for a moment just to be sure we understand what it would be like to be in those residences if those fields were lit by night lights. Maybe the wash would come off of the Victorian, and it would make a really nice night cityscape. And I don't mean that in a humorous way. There's probably a way to really integrate it and make it work. but there also should be a way to make it really kind of light-proof in the event that we go there. And the questions about HVAC, I don't doubt that you're going to be able to get the ventilation the way it needs to be, but good plausibility. I also applaud the use of solar on the roof. I may have missed in the staff report, is this actually a net zero building? Are we actually planning to be zero energy consumption net? If you'll forgive me for inviting him.
The green code, you know, the California Building Code and its green components are certainly headed in that direction. You know, there's a new code cycle coming out next year or this year, and in the last code cycle, a building official told me that the key phrase is seal it tight and vent it right. So, you know, that essentially is net zero, and that's the way the code is headed. Now, will we achieve that? You know, within the parameters of the code, we'll get as close as we can.
Thank you. And I also, but I was very excited to see that. I think that in that respect as well, this could be a model for future development. I think that we need to make rooftop PV, you know, if we're going to get to the goals that California has set for energy efficiency and reducing greenhouse gases, this is the kind of project that we need. This is the kind of feature that we need on our projects to get there. So, you know, anything you can do to max out that, I'd love for you to be able to sell that power back to PG&E at peak rates and make a bundle for your applicant. The drainage also looked really thoughtful on this. I appreciate the chair's prescience at my inquiry about electric vehicle sites. It also appeared in a way in the staff report. I think, again, that's the wave of the future. We need to make ourselves welcoming for the visitor with electric vehicles. It'll be a signal to a signal of value to your customers as well. And I would encourage you to make as much of the parking as you can work that way. As for the residential parking, I appreciated the report that the raceways, and I would guess the branch circuits are in place. It's just a matter of installing the fixture, you know, the last little bit of making the system work. And I think that's a really exciting development as well. There was one other point. Oh, with respect to signage. This is a really, you know, being next to that Victorian does present some real challenges for signage. And the only thought I had with that, and staff could probably inform me, is whether we can use sidewalk iconography to help them avoid things that pop up and detract, but make the business visible for people at a you know, on the walking, biking scale, the way we might have envisioned using painting of sidewalks to create pop-up parks in areas where we think that we could do more by defining the space through the way we mark the ground. What do you think?
That is a central part of this site plan, that the pedestrian areas, the pathways going into the site, the plaza areas would be a different color or texture of permeable concrete probably, that sort of more clearly defines where the pedestrian, where the people go. Also gives it a linear quality going back into the site to draw people in. As far as, I'm not entirely sure what your definition of sidewalk
Iconography.
Iconography is.
I'm just visualizing, you know, when I was hearkening back to a trip I made to Dublin a few years ago, and the way businesses tried to draw you in was marks on the sidewalk. You know, you would, there was an ice cream shop. In that particular example, they also had a sidewalk sandwich chalkboard, but, you know, they had an arrow that pointed from the sidewalk into their door that said ice cream, and they had an arrow pointing straight ahead that said not ice cream. So, you know, you got a clear view of, you know, just some of the ideas that you, and whimsy is, you know, that's probably not the right joke for this.
Certainly on the private walkways, the applicant can do all of that. I don't know if there are city regulations about the public sidewalk. We'd have to look into that a little bit. On the subject of signs, just sort of stepping back a minute to the question of whether there should be a sign program. As Jill commented to me, that based on the sort of the amount of businesses going on in that one place, some kind of sign program might be appropriate. And we could certainly work with the applicant on that. Our focus really has been on sort of big picture stuff to get to this point. But we certainly have time as they're going into building permit and that sort of thing to refine that. I guess the question is, would the sign program come back to you for informational, or you're not? I think Jill's going to give us some code lessons here.
While she's thinking about that, I'll close my my comments and just say I'm going to support the project. I think it's a really nice project. It's especially valuable to me that your neighbors have not expressed reservations. The Boys and Club Board comments are helpful in thinking this through. I wondered whether the solar panels could potentially create an adverse effect, but I guess that face of the club and the gym doesn't really have a risk of reflective glare. So other than asking whether it would be possible to expand the number of electric vehicle charging stations in the parking area, I have no other reservations about this project.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioner Polgar?
Thank you. I am also going to support the project, and I really appreciate staff and Mr. Grinnell explaining the history, kind of bringing me along in terms of the history of the design development, that process. That was very helpful to understand that. And this is definitely a challenging project in many ways. I'm very excited about it because I think this is, I agree with the comments that Mr. Hogan made about the street really needs something. And I do think this will be a very positive change. So I am very excited about the project. And I'm glad to see that Bikes Works will be continuing here in this great space. I also I appreciated Mr. Driscoll's comments about how I do think the massing is good, the size. I am in favor, I like contemporary design. I will be frank, it's not my style, but that doesn't necessarily matter because I think that I understand the constraints of trying to design in this space, but also make sure that we're not trying to mimic the historic structure. I think that's important. So I get it, even though maybe it's not my favorite, but that doesn't matter. I really support the project. I do think this is really good. And there are a couple things though, I do want to point out that I would see if there's a way to be creative about the signage, because that's what Jimmy was mentioning, is about doing signage on the street, literally in the street, like brickwork, for instance, in the street, or something like that, being creative. And I think that I would encourage, if there's possible ways that staff can allow that or work with the applicant on that. I think that could be really cool, and it would also add to that effect as you're walking down Kelly, of something a little more interesting to catch the eye and draw you in to this great, business. So I would get creative. I know that there's I just want to reiterate the kind of points about the kind of HVAC and ventilation. I live in a house that faces south, and we use passive solar heating, and it gets really hot. And we have a very sealed house. It's the these panels, and so it's very sealed. And so the ventilation, the HVAC is so important. So I do think that that's actually a really critical thing. I'm very glad that Commissioner Hernandez brought that up. I will say that also, as somebody who's had to put up window dressings, I can't imagine trying to do them on these windows, though. So I do think it will be. I wonder how that'll go. So it's just something to consider, is that that's a lot of square footage of windows, and I wouldn't want to have to clean those. But so I think there are some perhaps logistical challenges with the windows, but I understand why, you know, the idea of making this really stand out. I still would be, I would like to see some vegetation, like a tree near the as I mentioned, on the west side, if it were possible on that west corner. I don't know if it's, I know that there's something on the other side, like a parklet, but maybe it's possible to put the dumpsters on the other side with the opportunity of having a tree that I did like the look of that, and I did think that it kind of helped with the views from Highway 1, which granted are fleeting. They're not very, you know, people are driving by, but that's actually the view that people will most often see. And there's kind of this other really tall tree, and it might look really nice over time if another tree is growing up around in that setting. So that's just a personal opinion. I realize there's a lot of constraints. But otherwise, I am really supportive, and I'm very excited. I think this is a great project, mixed use, a great business to have downtown, and it helps the street a lot. So, and I applaud you for it. Looks like it was a lot of hard work, and so well done. So,
Thank you. Commissioner Hernandez, did you want to add anything additional?
Yeah, so again, I think this is a fantastic project, and I heartily support it. I think you've done something very bold. I will reiterate that we need to do something with the signage. It should be stronger. You've got the eastern gateway to downtown, and I know over the years, one of the lessons I've learned is many people who visit Half Moon Bay say, I didn't realize there was a downtown Half Moon Bay. So the extent to which this signage can feed into a downtown, the extent to which it might be visible from Highway 1, I think those are things to take into consideration as city staff and the applicant go through the process. I would reiterate, I live next door to Commissioner Polgar. I have a lot of windows that face southward. It can get hot and stuffy with these types of designs. Highly recommend ceiling fans, just some basic things. Just double click on everything you can do to make that ventilation work and get nice airflow moving through the property. It will improve the quality of the applicants' lives tremendously. The one thing that I'm unclear about, and I would like to get my fellow commissioners' opinions on, is what are we doing with the utilities? I have two sets of renderings here. The architectural plans include overhead utilities as they exist now, and then we have the supplementary renderings that show the cafe and some of the side views, which don't have the overhead lines. And I have a strong opinion that we need to underground these utilities here. I mean, already it's an eyesore. It's a hazard when you pull into the facility. It's easy to collide with the pole already. And so I just want to understand from a city staff perspective, like, what are we doing with these power lines and utilities? Are we going to underground them as part of this project? And if not, can we make a condition of approval that the city work with the applicant to try to underground the utilities?
Staff, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, this is Doug Garrison. We've spent a fair amount of time discussing those utilities, and we do have a typical city requirement that would require for the new building that they underground the utilities from the street to the building. One of the complications with this site is that those utilities also serve the lots behind this project and off to the west, and so it's not entirely within the applicant's control if the neighbors don't want to pay to help do this or agree to it. There is a condition in the resolution It's a slightly modified version of our standard condition that requires the utilities to be undergrounded. And the modification is that it essentially says that the applicant will work with the city engineer and the applicable utility companies, PG&E, to figure out what is actually feasible in that location where we have shared access and some complicated legal issues with getting the lines to the other properties. So it is something we've looked at. We'll continue to work out as we get into the building permit phase. But some of it's out of our hands. We have to deal with PG&E. We have to deal with the neighbors. It's less than certain what the outcome's going to be.
Thank you.
Through the chair.
Yes, Commissioner Benson.
So Rick, this is Jimmy. I thought we had a local coastal program policy that actually sort of took away our discretion on this, that we actually need to underground. Am I mistaken?
I think that's pending. It's not, I don't think that's actually current. I think it's pending.
Yes, all new developments required to do this. But typically, the new development just runs the line from the house to the nearest street pole. In this case, we're not sure what happens. They can run it to their building, but what happens to the buildings behind there? May have to leave the overhead lines in place until all of that stuff is resolved, if it ever is.
I mean, the analogy might be for sidewalk improvements or new sewer lines, where if it's going to be benefit a number of parcels, you would expect all of the parcels, as they're become eligible for, or they seek entitlements, that they would pick up their share of the cost. Is there a model like that that we could apply here?
I may defer to the city engineer on this if he wants to, but what we have done for those kinds of things is the engineering department requires that they sign a deferred agreement to implement that once it becomes available. I'd let city engineer kind of give the background on how those programs work.
Good evening.
Hi, Moss.
Moz Bezergini, city engineer. So with regards to the utilities, it's always a little challenging when we are looking at undergrounding. And one of the misconceptions is where you start and where you end. And one thing that always comes up is sometimes you actually have to put a riser or drop hole based on where you are, unless you do the entire segment. And in this case, pretty much along the entirety of Kelly Avenue until you get to Main Street, pretty much. So with that regard, it makes it a little challenging to be able to do that undergrounding. We definitely want to make sure that it's undergrounded to the building itself and has a drop from the nearest utility pole. And in that way, when the city, or if there's an assessment district or whatever, moves forward in the future, then it makes it much simpler to do that. And you don't have to deal with the conversions to the individual buildings and businesses. The challenge, as our planning staff mentioned, is with the fact that there's an overhead line that drops to the other property. Even if you underground the line, there might be a requirement for them to actually place a new pole at the back of the property to run the overhead, unless the neighboring property would be willing to underground that. And usually, from that point, from the point of the pole to the new service, that's generally the responsibility of the property owner. And so without that project without another project moving forward, it's a little premature to be able to address that, unfortunately.
Through the chair, in order to ensure that we could be successful at some point in the future where we had, scale economies for that project, had we considered asking for an easement that would allow an underground to go back to the rear properties on this parcel that would run, not, of course, we would avoid the structures, but have a place where we could get to it in the thoroughfares within the parcel's circulation plan?
That's a good question. We'll have to take a closer look at at the site. I would assume that there, I can't speak 100%, but I would assume there is an easement given that there are private lines crossing one private property to the other. But we can certainly take a closer look at that.
And if there is an easement for the existing lines that are above, is there something we need to do in conditioning this permit to establish the ability to underground, that is for the easement to exist underground to get to those parcels at some point in the future when we try to underground the whole kit and caboodle?
We could. I mean, this is really more of a private line, so it would be a private utility easement, and so if we'll take a closer look at that. If that makes, if it's not currently part of it, we can always add that as a condition to the application that easement be provided.
Okay, thanks.
At a location that's suitable for folks.
Very good. We've got a response from the applicant's architect, real quick.
I've done a little bit of research on this subject, especially with regard to the library. As you know, all of the lines to the library have been undergrounded, and I'm sure Maz knows more about this than I do, but those were, to my understanding, funded through credits that PG&E grants to communities, and certain communities are already all underground, like Foster City. So Foster City's credits were, I don't know what the appropriate term is, borrowed or granted to the library to underground purchased. They were purchased by the city. Purchased by the city to underground those lines. Now, you know, the main pole at the West Drive is a busy pole. You know, AT&T was just out there for a week, pretty much on that pole. So it's complicated. We'd be willing to work because we have to underground, and we want to get the main point of entry to the south end of our building. Baumgart's property has an overhead and an intermediate pole that would be right in the middle of our drive. So, you know, it's possible that we underground from the main pole in the event that, you know, all the poles on Kelly are undergrounded. And then, but since all of Baumgart and the arts community are overhead connected, it would be underground to the back of the site and then back up and, you know, connect to their buildings.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you. Okay. Any other comments from the commission? Okay. So, So with that, do we have a motion?
Actually, did we get feedback on?
Can we add a condition of approval to this project to direct city staff to explore all available means to assist the applicant with undergrounding utilities, including exploring funding of some partial funding of the undergrounding? We don't want to put an undue burden on the applicant or the neighbors nearby, but is the commission amenable to adding a condition like that?
It sounded like a condition on the city and not on the applicant, but is there, I guess I would defer to staff if you have any thoughts on some creative language. I think you get at what Commissioner Hernandez is asking and Commissioner Benjamin about just some language to include in here that would facilitate undergrounding in the future when those opportunities come about.
And I'm going to ask for 2 moments so that we can actually have an attorney and a planner and an engineer talk.
Would you like to take a
thank
quick
you.
break?
Yes, please.
Take a 5-minute break. Rick, I'm going to put you on mute. Well, yeah.
But
All right, we're going to bring the Planning Commission back to order, and let's hear from staff what they figured out.
Thank you for the break, and we wanted to get back to you regarding utilities, specifically the overhead power lines. We want to make sure everyone understands there's two different conditions. There's those that are in the public right-of-way running along Kelly, and those that are on private property along the west property line of this project site, which also has implications and connections to adjacent properties as they go back. With regards to Kelly and the public right-of-way, the typical way that these get addressed when they're, this is pretty heavy overhead stuff. This is not an easy thing to require of an applicant for undergrounding the frontage. And sometimes what happens if you underground the frontage is you get one pole taken down and you get two popped up that flank the site. So this is not a good time right now to do that. It will probably in the future get addressed through some kind of an assessment district or the like. And we can't have a condition of approval about an assessment district. We can't presuppose how a property owner is going to vote on an assessment district. So that is a hoped-for thing in the future, like what was done on Correas. On the private property, the applicant is amenable to some language that we're working on with the city attorney that would be of the like of, they would agree to not oppose undergrounding in the future in the vicinity of their western property line, allowing for access, but we can't overcommit them in terms of exactly how that would be implemented because there are other easements involved, and there's at least one trench will be required, possibly two. They should not all be assumed to be needed to be on this applicant's property. So we would request that the Planning Commission, if you've all expressed support for the project, that if you had a motion to approve, that you would request that we produce language from our city attorney that would cover that private property condition for undergrounding in the future. And I think our applicant's very comfortable with that.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Benjamin?
So just so I'm clear, in agreements that I've read, where we aren't in a position to require a party or a counterparty to approve something, we have language that says that approval will not be unreasonably withheld. Is that the kind of direction that you're talking? Okay, I understand. Somebody else want to do this motion? You're so good. Thanks a lot. Okay, so help me out.
I'm gonna interrupt you one time, and I apologize. We got so distracted by the big item of undergrounding that we did want to acknowledge signage really briefly. There is a condition regarding a sign permit, and the community development director can approve quite a bit of signage, but it sounds like you have a lot of ideas to maybe push the envelope a little bit on signage, and that is okay to do. If they would like to do that, they can come back to us with a sign program, and you'll see that. So the condition as it's written covers. If you want to expand on it to acknowledge a sign program, you can, but your code already covers it. And so I think you've got tools for them, and you've already encouraged them and given them some guidance.
And one more, we wanted to follow up on the EV question. Is the applicant comfortable with providing charging stations so that we can get some electric vehicle parking on the site?
I think the interest was not necessarily in the garages, as I understand those are going to be wired.
Right.
And they could be installed if needed. More general public charging station for patrons of the business.
My answer to that would be we would make every effort so long as they're not cost prohibitive, and with if we can facilitate that with cable runs for site lighting and so on, we would definitely make that happen. It would be more successful if there was a partnership in that endeavor, or if there was a outside vendor that leased the space or something like that. it's quite a, just on the surface, I'm not familiar with the mechanics of it. The engineering I am, but not the fiscal mechanics of it. So I don't want to commit anything.
Understood. I think it's been a request that we've had of other projects before, so that doesn't necessarily feel like we're stretching too far.
Excuse me, you'll need to come to the dais, but thank you.
With a charging station like that, would it, I don't know how long it takes a car to charge. Does anyone have an idea if a car would be in the parking lot for 2 hours, an hour, 5 hours? How long would it take?
Yeah, that's an important consideration. It varies with the car and it varies with the amount of power that's available. A high-capacity charger could charge in 45 minutes to an hour. A low-capacity charger might take several hours.
Yeah, but if you have a business that possibly is
Yeah, understood.
running at the front of the property as well as a business in the back, that would really sort of tie up parking for the customers for both businesses.
I appreciate the concern.
Thank you.
Fair consideration, yeah.
So, question for staff, Cheshire-faced staff. If I get to the, I'm looking for language exactly. I'm looking for is your suggestion that our motion direct staff to bring back I guess it would be a condition on staff, not a condition on the applicant, so I'm struggling to find, if you have suggested language that we can use to condition the project rather than you, I would like to include a condition with respect to the private undergrounding. I'm still a bit at sea about what those words might be. Forgive me.
I think
what we were thinking of was adding a condition or maybe expanding on the existing underground utilities condition to add a sentence saying that with respect to the overhead utilities on the private property on the western side of the parcel, the applicant agrees to not oppose undergrounding if it becomes feasible in the future, and would work with staff to provide at a minimum temporary access to facilitate, something like that. Is that?
Thank you. That's in the record now, for which I thank you. I move that we approve coastal development permit, gosh, there's a number here somewhere, the resolution next in order with the amendment to the utility undergrounding condition that was read into the record by the city attorney. That we encourage signage that uses the flat surfaces of the streetscape where feasible to innovatively draw attention to the business. Anybody want something else? Spit it out.
I guess I was under the impression, based on what through the chair, I was under the impression, based on what staff had said, that it wasn't necessary to include anything about the
Strike the
motion.
motion, strike the motion
okay,
about, the
that
part
was
of the
my-
motion about signage. We'll stick with the undergrounding. And I'm going to withhold, I would encourage the applicant to consider electric vehicles. I understand the time constraint. You may find that it's an addition to your business, but I won't ask for a condition for an electric vehicle in your parking lot. I hope you'll provide one anyway. That's it.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Okay, project passes. Congratulations. Okay, moving on to our next item, we have item 1C. And if we could, we do have a couple additional items on the agenda, so if we could just, we'll be here all night otherwise. So. Item 1C, Capital Improvement Program, General Plan Conformance. Take it away.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Mazbal Zagini again, City Engineer. The previous item reminded me that I need to get my bike serviced, so I think I'll be going to Bike Works soon. Tonight I'm here to talk about the Capital Improvement Program for fiscal year 2019-2020, and specifically regards to the General Plan Conformance. Our 1920 CIP emphasis was on a few different particular items. First and foremost, it's the conformance with the general plan, alignment with the council's strategic priorities, but also on a more programmatic side is the completion of current fiscal year projects and also a further organization as we go, as this CIP document evolves with additional information and master plan documentation. So we've taken these larger programmatic approaches to improvements and made more specific projects, which we'll talk a little bit more as we go through. Capital program categories, we basically have 47 different programs and projects that are listed active in 20. I thought our Commissioner Benjamin would appreciate this picture. So for the active projects for 1920, there are 47 that are divided up between the programs and projects, and that goes into the 8 listed categories that are up here tonight. I won't read them off. I won't bore you with that. So the first one is the stormwater improvements category. The 3 projects, we've got 3 projects listed currently on this project as program as far as, at least category, my apologies, as far as projects and programs. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just I'm happy to answer the questions afterwards. But there's one new addition to the stormwater improvement category. It's the Green Infrastructure and Stormwater Program. This essentially is an account to help, a program that helps to improve our green infrastructure needs as we go into the implementation phase of our green infrastructure plan. That's something that is required by the state through our National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit. So we have formalized that into its own program to help further support that. One example is the picture on the right here, which is the bioretention swale that's in front of the new library. We also have the Kelly and Highway 1 drainage project that was mentioned earlier tonight. I have the schematic drawing here for the plan view that shows the rerouting of the stormwater that takes it away from the going across Highway 1 into the school district property and moving this stormwater down towards an open channel flow and then ultimately into Palacios Creek. The economic development category, there are 3 projects listed on this one. One in particular, the Main Street tree lights. This is a project that is, and I actually want to make one clarification here. It's mislabeled in Exhibit A of Attachment 1, and it causes a little bit of confusion. I was a little confused because it's called the Main Street Lights, and we do have a Main Street street light improvement project. So just for the record, I wanted to clarify that that attachment should, the Exhibit A to the Attachment 1 should be Main Street tree lights. The median landscape project is the economic development category is really about enhancing the economic development of the city. So, as the general plan local coastal program update is one of the categories there. And the other project here is the median landscape project. This is essentially the last portion of Highway 1. Once the Highway 1 South project is completed, this is the last portion of the median that has not been improved south of Kelly Avenue. This project is it's currently on the books. We are looking for the additional funding, but that's something that's going to be coming up. The next category we move on to is the operational improvements, and there's two projects that are covered under here. The first one listed is the financial software, and that's something that's been that the city's been working on over the last fiscal year with some of the challenges of our administrative services department. It's been moving a little slower than we had hoped, but we are looking to complete that project in the upcoming fiscal year. And another project that we would like to be kicking off, and we're actually in the conversations currently, is the implementation of a GIS system. The city currently uses GovClarity, which is a subsidiary of the county program, and so we might be picking our chair's brain on our GIS implementation moving forward. I've done my research. Parks improvements is the next category. We have a couple of projects here with the Ocean View Park permanent restroom and site improvements projects. That's something that the Planning Commission has seen in the past and will be coming back to the Planning Commission in the future. The Carter Park improvements is another one that it's actually part of the 1819 and moving forward to 1920. That project we have started the design work, the topographics mapping, and the geotechnical work has been completed to date, and we're moving forward with design and public outreach. Facility improvements is the next category is the facility improvements, and this encompasses a wide variety of different types of facilities. It talks about our sidewalk facilities as well as our building facilities. Another project that's under this is the annual community enhancement program. That's more of a project that, based on council direction, could be used to either supplement another project or a standalone project as the council sees fit on an annual basis. We also have the emergency response program that's grouped under this category, and that's essentially a allocation of $250,000 for potential emergency relief as needed. One other project is our Ted Adcock Community Center kitchen entry remodel project. That one is actually close to completion as far as the design, and we'll be going out to bid in the near future and hope to have that constructed actually this summer. The facility improvements is continued here. The Sheriff's Substation renovation project is another one I wanted to highlight. That's a project that's active. We are moving forward with the plans and specifications and hope to do some interior retrofit, and we're going to actually, and one major component is actually leveling the building. The substation is a series of 4 modulars, and we're looking at basically raising and leveling the foundation for another 5 to 6 years until we move forward with the civic center site plan, which is also listed here. And the street light upgrades on Main Street is another project, and so that it's different than the tree lights on Main Street. This is looking at upgrading our street lighting along Main Street, the decorative lights that have been in place for a number of years. The heads are not, we've done some LED conversions. They're becoming challenging just because the hardware's rusted over the years and replacement parts have become hard to come by. So unfortunately, we're looking at replacing those with a different type of fixture. The next categories are sewer improvements. I didn't want to show too many graphic images. We've got plenty of CCTV records. If anybody is interested, we're happy to share it. But this is so the picture I have here is at Ocean and Miramontes. This was a new manhole that was set for a bypass, and this is actually something that's helped us with potential SSO events along Kelly, especially when coupled with stormwater runoff. In years past, we've had sewer backups when we have had flooding because of the I&I issue, and I'm happy to say that with this project that was completed this last fiscal year, we actually, the rains we've seen over the last winter, although we did have localized flooding, residents actually called to say that they did not have any sewer backup issues, so that was I was glad to hear that. The sewer improvements category is actually one of the biggest ones that we've looked at, separating out the programmatic and the project specific. So we've had, so in the past, the pump station enforcement repair replacement program was this large overarching program that basically captured every the 3 pump station we have in the city, and the force main lines that we have in our collection system, and we've actually looked at separating those out. So for example, we have the Ocean Colony Pump Station Replacement Project that we've been working on the design and environmental over the last year and a half. That's another item that has come to the Planning Commission in March. This came March 26th, I believe this came for CDP. And so that'll be another project that we're moving forward. So we've separated that out, as well as the Lauren Lane Sewer Main Repair Project. And the reason why that project actually on Lauren Lane is separated out from the larger programmatic approach is Lauren Lane is very challenging in that the sewer main runs between the houses. Unfortunately, it appears that access easements were not obtained at the time of that installation. So it's made it a little bit more challenging. And so because of that, it's been given its own project title. The next one is the street improvements category. There's one new addition to this is the neighborhood traffic safety program. And so what this is, it's to be determined the amount of funding, but what staff is envisioning on this is actually establishing a guideline and policy for traffic safety, for neighborhood traffic safety program. Currently, we take complaints and inquiries from residents, and they submit their requests for traffic calming policies and implementation on specific streets. And we have a traffic safety committee that is comprised of staff, the Public Works Department, the planning, the Community Development Director, the fire, and the Sheriff's Office. And so we look at that at that level. But it's the challenge is that there isn't a designated funding source for these inquiries to come through. And so by establishing this program, we will essentially establish guidelines and rules and regulations on how a neighborhood can approach a traffic calming program for a particular street. It gives some prioritization of projects based on time of submittal, and it basically organizes into a refined process rather than kind of this as we go along approach that we've been doing in the past. The Main Street Bridge Advisory Committee is actually going to be meeting in the near future. Happy to announce we've got some information on the bridge, on the deck, on the abutments, and so that'll be a project that we'll be moving forward on. And we're currently trying to figure out the right time for the meeting based on the committee members and their availability. Another project here is the Pavement Management and Traffic Safety Program. That's actually the program that funded the project, the picture that you see on the right. This is the end of Magnolia Street on the east side of Highway 1, and that program funded the current street reconstruction project that's wrapping up at Miramontes Point Road. The next category is the trail improvements category. We've got a couple of projects here that we're moving forward on with the upcoming adoption of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan, we're going to be looking at the implementation of that program moving forward. And one good example is the Bikeway Connectivity Project North. So that particular project is from Roosevelt to Marauder Road. And the city actually has $350,000 grant from the San Mateo County Transportation Authority. And this project abuts a county project that takes it from Marauder Road north to basically Surfers Beach. And so we are looking at moving this project forward with a design consultant coming on board soon. We're going through the process of interviews, and it makes a lot of sense with the fact that the funding is semi-secured and there's a county project that it would be linked to in the near future. We're moving forward on that particular project as well. Another one is the vertical access at Poplar Beach. You can see that picture on the right. It's a relatively steep grade. We've been maintaining it as we can with basically filling it with materials as we go along. But we're going to be looking at doing an improvement to establish some railroad ties and allow for a little bit of a gradual step to come down to the Poplar Beach. This particular one, it's going to be challenging. There's certain topography that, as much as you want, there's really no way of meeting ADA requirements. And so this is one of those ones that we're going to make it as accessible as possible, but short of an elevator on a eroding bluff, that's really the only way you can really get full ADA access. But we're going to do our best to provide better and safer access coming down for all the users. So that brings us to our recommendation tonight. So we've reviewed the capital improvement program for fiscal year 2019-2020 projects, and what we're asking tonight is adoption of a resolution with findings that the proposed fiscal year 19-20 capital projects as contained in the city's 5-year capital improvement program are consistent with the city's general plan. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I'm going to first just open up the public hearing and close the public hearing because we don't have any public here. And we can bring it back for commission discussion and any questions.
Very insightful. So I'll preface by saying I don't dislike any of these projects, but I want to understand exactly what we're doing tonight, because obviously, we're not defining any approvals with respect to the details of any project. Some of the projects I saw listed in the list of spreadsheets said already approved. I don't remember when they got approved in some cases. So some of them I did. So I just want to be sure I'm not, by agreeing with this, we're saying that based on the little bit we know about these projects, we don't see a glaring conflict with the general plan. But for example, the way we would do maintenance on a project, once we see the details, obviously could pose a challenge. Similarly, I don't think we're being asked to agree with these as prioritizations. It may be that there are projects that one or more of us think are more critical. That's not our call. It's the city council's call, staff's call, to advise them. And you're not asking us to agree in that respect. So I guess, the poster child version of that is the annual community enhancement project. I have no idea whether that's compatible with the general plan. It sounds like good politics. I'm not opposed to it, but I have no idea what that means, and I don't know how to assess it. So I don't want to be a stick in the mud or a fly in the ointment, but I don't get it, so I need some help.
Understood, and maybe I can take a quick stab, and then Jill can bail me out, as she usually does. So as far as what we're asking tonight, it's really the list of the projects, and that's one of the requirements for us to have a defensible capital improvement program. We do need to ensure that the listed projects for the upcoming fiscal year do meet the general plan requirements. Now, I know there are some projects out there like the annual enhancement project, and I honestly, at this point, I don't know what that project would be either. or if there would even be a project under that category. In the past 2-3 fiscal cycles, that program has actually been utilized to capture funding and actually transfer it towards the median landscaping improvements on Highway 1 in conjunction with the Chamber of Commerce. So that was one way that that was utilized, was actually to support another capital project. Certainly, there's a possibility they can propose a new project, and at that time, it would be our community development director's prerogative to ensure that it meets the general plan before we move forward with a full scope. I don't know if you want to add anything on that one. And then as far as the notes, that is there on Exhibit A. So that was informational. That's not. Those aren't details that are. You want to go through that? Okay.
I'm going to add a little bit more on that. What did we call it again? The annual enhancement project. This is it's $50,000. I believe it's usually selected by the mayor, and you could, in making a general plan conformance finding, condition your statement that it must conform to the general plan. But in many cases, it might not involve development at all. And so I just want to be clear about that. Also, in this list in Exhibit A, I'm the one who missed the word tree on Main Street, tree lights. So sorry about that, Moz. Anything in that column with notes where it says that you've approved it, you really did. You had a coastal development permit. This was Highway 1 North, Highway 1 South. These are things that are ongoing projects, so they've taken more than a year to go through. They're at different phases of entitlement, design development, funding, going out for bid, staging the project, that kind of thing. So you're going to see these cycle through, but if it's here, you have seen it. You've recommended approval of the Parks Master Plan. Council approved that in January. And you're going to see the bicycle and pedestrian master plan soon. Not all of these projects require coastal development permit. There are many projects on this list that don't. Pavement upgrade projects aren't going to come to you. Most of the sewer projects won't come to you. We brought the Ocean Colony sewer project to you because it was significant, and it was a pipe upsizing, and in fact we were on the fence on being able to exempt it, but we chose to be more conservative. So you're not going to see all 47 projects and programs on this list, but the ones that do comprise development will come your way. And let me see what else we need to share with you. So you're really focused on these projects being in conformance with the general plan. There may be some that are, it's sort of tenuous, like having a GIS system. This is not something that we need to necessarily worry about. It helps us do our work. So from that perspective, we would like to think you'd find that it certainly isn't contrary to the general plan. Okay.
So through the chair, I'm totally okay with the GIS system. I would like to see more publish the ability for us to provide input to you and see it get published, you know. So if there's, like, and you're very smart to pick on Brian, get that insight. I'll give you a couple of examples of things that I wasn't sure about. So for example, in the Carter Park, we're pretty close to an ISHA. There's a project for electrical in that area, specifically called out. I don't remember a CDP for that. Maybe it happened while I wasn't around.
That was a tiny project, and you're going to see the whole park. You're going to have a coastal development
I get
permit.
It. But it said it was already previously approved, so it sort of caught my eye.
I will show that to you later, but
Yeah.
you will see the Carter Park plans, you will have a coastal development permit, and you will have the CEQA review for that project.
Another example that caught my eye was the Wavecrest water line. I am all for fire flows. I think it's a great idea, but we know that we have to attach conditions to expansions of capacity to ensure that they're not growth-inducing, which would violate the local coastal program. And again, I'm not, maybe something happened when I was, not paying attention the way I should have, but I want to be sure if it really hasn't been approved, but we say it has, we know what the plan is.
I guess I'm trying to figure out where it says that the water main was approved.
So if we're looking on the summary sheets here,
Right.
on the summary sheets, correct me if I'm
on
wrong.
the summary sheets, okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jimmy, but
You got it.
I'm looking at the page. So there is a category there that says status previously approved. For the Wavecrest water main project, it says status new. So not a project that was previously
Oh,
approved.
I'm sorry, I made
So-
the wrong, so that one we're good.
That one's a new project. And I think just, and staff, correct me if I'm wrong, but like on Carter Park improvements, I recognize we haven't approved the design, we haven't approved the specific Carter Park improvements.
So I
But
think
we did approve
The master plan.
the park master plan, which included a programmatic level goal of improving Carter
So-
Park.
So let me, so now I understand, because I thought we were talking about the Exhibit 8 Attachment 1. That is
Sorry.
that's more specific to what the commission has approved. So when you see previously approved status on the CIP summary sheet, that means that it was included in a previous CIP document. It doesn't mean that
Got
it's
it.
actually come through and been approved by
Thank you. That's helpful.
by the planning commission. That's the one, yeah, that attached, the Exhibit A is the one that will say if the project was, if you guys have seen this project as a project, not a programmatic line item, if that makes sense.
So if the Carter Park improvements project were to come to us and we were to say, this is terrible, we don't want to approve it, and we denied it, this CIP summary sheet would essentially go away. That money would be either reallocated or a new project would come forward. Is that,
That would be,
this, I mean, I'm being very
Draconian.
theoretical.
We'd
but-
walk it up to council, so there's that. But if there was a project that you ended up not approving and
Right.
council didn't approve, yes, that
I'm
would
just
be
trying to,
meant for
just
CIP.
for the point of
Yep.
clarity, that,
Yep.
that there's still discretionary approval
absolutely.
projects that are in.
For the majority of them, yeah, absolutely.
Right. So as part of the parks master plan, that would also explain the paving of the park. Like right now, there's a gravel parking lot in front of the train depot.
Yes.
And I don't know if we've done a CDP for that. We haven't done a CDP.
No, we
for
have
that.
not.
Got it.
It was, general improvements were included in the Parks Master Plan.
Yeah, again, that was just
So
one
it gets
of
kind
those
of put in
sheets.
here, so
I think,
give
I think
Moz the
what,
opportunity to start working on design.
and I think that's what it is. So from the council perspective, they look at that as previously approved as part of the previous CIP document.
Right.
I think we're going to change one thing I'm going to take away from this is we're going to say previously included versus approved.
Fair
'cause
enough.
They haven't been approved.
Okay, thank you. That's a very helpful, you just saved yourself a lot of conversation. And it was a great list. Is it safe for me to assume, for us to assume, that if it's not in this list, it's not in, I mean, these are the CIP projects. So if there's some pet project that one of us has that we don't see it, we can go home and cry a river, right? It's just not there.
These are the ones that we have included in the 1920. Now, the 5-year CIP does have projections for other projects down the line for the next 4 fiscal years after that, but those are more for placeholders until funding and the projects come up. And so if they're slated for 2021, it could be included in this package for inclusion for the next cycle.
Yeah, okay, so my only comment is since we don't have that much details, it feels like a tautology to me. Like, I totally get where you are. You need us to say something. That's the way it works. I will say it, but I don't feel like I have enough detail, so I'm out of my comfort zone.
Commissioner Polgar?
So I had one question regarding the urban forest management program. It's not a lot of money that's allocated for 1920. the way it's described is, maintenance and reducing tree, if there's tree roots and sidewalks, et cetera. But the picture that's shown is, of like, the eucalyptus, which are definitely need a lot of maintenance, and I know they're city owned. So, that was a little bit, I don't think that's gonna come to us, if it's, for instance, if it's eucalyptus and it's just maintenance of trees, I don't think that's gonna come to us. How does the decision process happen? Is it kind of when there's a problem, that's, we kind of deal with it? What kind of program is this, I guess? Is it reactive or proactive?
The city actually has a tree inventory of city-owned trees and partially owned city trees and private property trees. And so what we've actually been doing is that program has been addressing those trees that are either dead or dying or are a safety issue and get the maintenance. And so we actually have a program, and we do update that tree inventory every year or 2 years. We did 2 years ago it was completed, and so as we go through and maintain it, that database gets updated, and correct. This is a continuation of that effort.
So I just want to direct Commissioner Benjamin to the discussion here on general plan CIP consistency in the staff report.
Thank you. I can do that.
Because I think that kind of gets at your question, in that it does state that the programs and projects are consistent with the general plan, but goes on to clarify that additional analysis will be needed on the specific projects, and the Planning Commission will be asked to act upon discretionary approvals and environmental reviews. So, I think, to some degree, we're essentially saying the list with the information that we have now is compliant with the general plan, and not necessarily, we're not making a determination on the individual projects.
I was drinking the Kool-Aid right up until I got to the annual community enhancement one. I was right there with you. And I'm fine with that. I could smith the language in those spreadsheets, the one about the trees affecting the sidewalk, and then there was one about the trees or the sidewalks. It's also true that they affect the trees, and that wasn't discussed in that project. We can create tree coffins. So there's a lot that I would change, but that's not our job. I'm not here for that. I will support this.
Commissioner Reddick, any questions?
Well, I think I understand the process. You need the Planning Commission to be on record that there's nothing egregiously inconsistent with the list of projects and the local coastal plan. I guess it's obvious, but the process doesn't involve the Planning Commission exercising any judgment on the actual budgets for these things either, right? That's a totally different process. That's fine.
Okay. Commissioner Hernandez, do you have any comments?
As a financial planning document, I think this is consistent with the local coastal plan, and I'm actually excited about a lot of the projects in here.
Okay, and I just want to be on the record that I support community enhancement. So, do you have a motion?
I move we approve the resolution next in order.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, unanimous approval.
Thank you.
Next item, recommend to City Council an ordinance and bylaws to establish an architectural advisory committee. Apropos, given the project we saw tonight.
All right, good evening again. We're happy to bring this item to you. There's no PowerPoint. What you have before you is a draft ordinance and bylaws for your consideration to make a recommendation to City Council to establish an architectural advisory committee. This is something that has come up in your forum in the past. This is a function of the Planning Commission, and the city has a history of having had an architectural review committee. But it was disbanded quite a few years ago, and since that time, that duty came back to you, which the project tonight might have made you more comfortable if you had had an architectural review committee or advisory committee as part of that process. Council they're really eager to work on this as well. I can reassure you, I was liaison to a committee for about a dozen years, and they're incredibly helpful. But that experience that I had from that, and just kind of observing your process, council's process, the community's values and how they perceive of development. And frankly, the record of projects that I've looked at, there has been some confusion in the past as to the role of the previous architectural review committee. And so you'll see that reflected. Maybe it's too heavy-handed. So I'm looking forward to your feedback on this ordinance. But that committee was behaving in a way or making motions in a way that they were assuming they were entitling projects. And I'm very concerned about that because you are the entitlement body for development review, and every once in a while it's me, but you are the appeal body for me. So this is really important to keep land use planning decisions and CEQA in the Planning Commission's realm. And so that's why you see the name is advisory, and that they will be making recommendations. And in fact, the other layer through here, and it surprised me working on this, that we hit Title 1, 2, 4, 14, 15, 17, and 18 of your code, because it, it did, is that I think we've been using language that architectural and site review are a separate permit. And they're really a component of the overall holistic review of a project, like CEQA is in the spectrum of things that you're reviewing. Conformance with your local coastal program, with the general plan, with the zoning. Design review is another part of that. So we want to acknowledge, all those things interplay, and it's really important to have design review kind of iteratively occurring while a project is going through other process of development as it's getting ready for you to see it, whether it's subject to CEQA, maybe you have a study session on the project at some point in time. So just wanted to talk about that a little bit and vet it, because you're going to be experiencing this more than anybody else as we bring a design review advisory body into the fold of the city again. And would love your feedback on it, and we are planning to bring this to council pretty quickly if you have recommendations about this tonight. And if you want me to go through what's in your report, I can, but I was assuming you've read it, and yes, okay.
Great. Thank you very much. This is a public hearing, so we'll open and close the public hearing. And I'll just start off by saying thank you, Jill, for putting this together. I think it will be helpful. No offense to Commissioner Ruddick or Commissioner Polgar, but I think all of us sort of felt a little panic attack when we lost John Evans here on the Planning Commission, because he was really, the soul of the sort of the architecture side of things. That's really what he brought to the table. And actually, the project we saw tonight, initially when I saw it, I had a pretty strong reaction to it. And John, in his eloquent way of sort of describing the architecture, sold me on it. So it was really valuable to have that, because that's not my lane. And I think I've heard from others in the past that the Planning Commission has at times either swung too far on the architectural review side, or perhaps not enough on the architectural review side. So I think having that specific advisory committee, I think would be is really good. And I think defer to staff and Jill's experience in working with these types of bodies and crafting a good ordinance. I agree with her perspective on making it very clear that this is an advisory role. So yeah. So with that, those are my comments. Commissioner Ruddick.
Well, I've had a recent opportunity to see, excuse me, up close and personal the breadth of subject matter that planning commissioners are expected to be intelligent about. So I would greatly welcome the addition of this kind of expertise into the process. I think it's a terrific idea.
Thanks for the report. Thanks for the hard work in the draft. I found what I think are a bunch of little typos that I want to be sure get fixed. Don't know if you want that before you take it to the, get a resolution, or you want the resolution with fixes. You can let me know, because I don't know how urgent this is for you to get this up if you want to wait, or not. There were a couple of strategic things. First, I'll say I was on the Planning Commission in the 90s when we had an architectural review board, and they did a great job. They were also a farm club for future planning commissioners, which worked really well for us. So I fully support this. One of the areas where I think we could do better, and I think it's implied in your consensus, better than what we did in the 90s, not better than what you've proposed here, is instead of getting their pinpoint answer, their consensus answer, it's nice to get a range of views. In other words, instead of getting just the consensus was that we do it, that it should be this. It can be a little softer so that we can see the discretion but benefit from their thinking. Something. I leave it to them for how to formalize that. Our architectural review boards in the 90s did not enjoy great public participation, and so one of the challenges, I think you've done a great job getting the Parks and Rec Commission to be engaged and people are participating. Getting architectural review participation, I think, is going to be interesting. People are kind of, they get keyed up for planning commission meetings. Can we gen them up for architecture, because that's relevant? I don't know how we do that. In the document, sometimes I think it was referred to as an architectural review board. I didn't always see the word advisory, or maybe it was and I just read the document wrong. So I want to be sure that we are consistent in our viewing. And I distinguish between the language of the bylaws and the code, the municipal code stuff. With respect to the municipal code, the fact that these design review approvals are attached to coastal development permits generally left me wondering about how a design decision might be appealed if, I guess the interaction between appeals of the coastal development permit, which is constrained by 18.20 of the zoning ordinance, chapter 20 of zoning, and the language in this chapter, Municipal Code Title 14, which I don't know if that's indirectly incorporated into our zoning ordinance, but if it isn't, then the rules for appealing it are different. For example, the appeal period for a coastal development permit is 10 working days, and there's very specific language, at 5 p.m. the day after the approval, the evening of the approval. And the language with respect to appeals in Title I, which is applicable to other kinds of city approvals, is 10 calendar days. So I'm trying to figure out how that nexus, whether it sticks together cohesively or we need to think that through differently. Thoughts?
Do you have more?
No, that was just my abrupt, dramatic stop.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's fantastic. I would like all of your, if you have your typo markup that I could have this week, that would be fantastic. We are going to move this quickly. I do want to answer a couple of your questions kind of in a rounded way. You'll notice that the intent here is to give the City Council a lot of flexibility with how to set up the kinds of advisory committees and commissions that you may need over time that would come in and out of practice. So we didn't want to set up the function of this group to overly in the code. It's in the bylaws. And so that comment that you made about range of views, that resonates with me. And that's going to be something that you're going to see in planning practice, in our actual practitioner approach to this work. And so you'll have to give us feedback on that. This is going to be something that we have to adjust to, and I'm not even sure how to write about that in the bylaws, nor if we need to, but that's been my intention of how staff is going to work with this. So just some thoughts on that. Yeah, Title 14 is quite the thing. So that bit in Title 14, that's your building and construction section of your Muni code. It's not part of the zoning ordinance. It's not part of your local coastal program implementation plan. My understanding is that that section used to live in your zoning code. There was a chapter that's empty in my book.
Historical.
Yeah, it was taken out, and I can think of quite a few reasons why maybe it was done that way. What we'll do, we're not ready to put it back in because you saw how much coding it took just to do this, and part of it is because we're trying to improve the language about what we call design review and acknowledge the kinds of things that are part of design review: site plan, landscaping, architectural design, which has never been especially clear in the way that this was written. I think it was assumed, but it's not obvious. So what we'll take a look at how to maybe put something into 1820 for coastal development permits about referring out, because the intent of having an appeal on a project that is related to design is that the appeal is of the coastal development permit, not of a design review permit. We don't want there to be a separate permit for that, a separate appeal process. The design is inherent to the project. And so if the design is what the basis of the appeal is on, that affects the project as a whole. To redesign the project could have all kinds of implications to other things that are in the coastal program. So we'll take a look at that. That's a very helpful suggestion. We went back and forth. I spoke a lot with our city attorney about whether or not it was the right time to plug that back in to the zoning code. We don't think so. We would like to finish our local coastal program land use plan update, because that's going to give us a need to do quite a bit of a zoning overhaul, and that would be a very good time to pop that back over and have it structured properly. So I hope that answered most of the questions you had, but I think you might have more.
It was, so I'll just put some examples out, not because I think this document's bad. I think it's a really good document. I can see a lot of thought in it. But for example, in the draft ordinance, we've got the reference to within 10 calendar days for appeals. And I don't understand exactly how the nexus for that. So this is, I'm looking at attachment 2, the very first page, and there's a reference to appeals being strictly limited to within 10 days for things that are not coastal development permits. If that's going to be perceived as applicable in some way to something that's attached to a coastal development permit, then there is an inconsistency in our appeal standards that we need to understand. On page 3, this is section 2.24A 030, where the council can disband an advisory committee or commission at its discretion pursuant to a majority of the vote of the city council. For most committees, I think that we can do that. I thought that the planning commission because of its local coastal program responsibilities, would require a certification of such an amendment rather than just a vote of the city council. These are illustrations of the things I don't understand exactly.
So that, two things. Title I, we think we actually cleaned it up because it's showing that decisions that I make can be appealed to the Planning Commission. We can look back at that appeal timeline, but the potential, we're probably not going to number it this way. We have to fix our numbering, but this advisory committees and commissions does not apply to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is covered in that Chapter 2.24, and these are committees and commissions outside of the Planning Commission.
So because
So
the
we have to
title
be-
is architectural committees and commissions,
Where?
I'm looking at, I'm paraphrasing what you said. I think
Oh, the
there's the title.
advisory.
That means it couldn't be a planning commission.
It says advisory committees and commissions, yeah. Your commission is covered up above.
Okay, so that was just me not parsing it well. In the next page, 4.14, who is the enforcement officer? Not
It-
immediately pursuant to our decision tonight, I just.
Yeah, it depends on what we're enforcing.
Okay,
So if it's a land use code, I have responsibility for that.
okay. In Title 14, not the first page, not the second page, on the third page, where we're talking about public projects, I noticed that the discretion, so I'm in Part C, Public Projects, the addition, and there's a list of who can call for review and approval, and the discretion did not include the Planning Commission. Was that inadvertent, or is that by design?
Well, in public projects under C1, and site plan review and approval by the Planning Commission. I'm sorry, let me look at, are you on D?
No, I'm in the second half of C, after the semicolon.
It's just weird if that reads as one full sentence, or if
Okay, we'll check
it's
that.
clear that,
Yeah.
Planning Commission shall be required for all public projects, and it's just not clear if that list is,
Let me clear that up, because,
Yeah.
so let's take an example of this, off of the item you just had. So, Main Street light fixtures. We might not need a coastal development permit, but we might want advice from an architectural review committee about that. And the Public Works Director may go visit that committee with some options. I don't know if that's a great example, but I think you can imagine that one. So what we were trying to do is make sure staff is also supported in the kinds of work that they're doing. City engineer may need to get some input.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But if, just as there are times in our zoning ordinance where staff could make a decision that something didn't require a CDP, and a member of the public may think, no, I actually think it does. There's a process for questioning exemptions and not eligibility. I wonder if that's pertinent to this decision process. Maybe it's not, because it's just seeking their advisory engagement. So I don't know. Maybe I was overthinking that. I'll let it go. Then, since I'm just going to try to get through these now so we can move it forward. 14.37.045 appeals. Determinations regarding architectural, landscape, and site plans are part of the permit. And this is the part that it feels to me like we need some breadcrumb to connect that to the zoning ordinance. skipping forward a couple of pages.
Point of order, do we need to file an extension on the meeting tonight?
Not till 10:30, Rick.
I don't have that many, Rick. And I can, while I'm doing, Sarah, if you had comments. Okay, 18.02, sorry, 18.12. This is getting close to the end. And there's a discussion of open space land, including open space -C, which is open space conservation district, right? So I've gotten back several pages. I'm still in attachment 2. Near the bottom of the page where it says Chapter 1812. And I didn't know that we allowed signs in open space conservation districts.
I don't think that's the subject of this.
Yeah, no, I get, I don't want to go far afield. It just, I want, you know,
Okay.
it's a breadcrumb, because I don't know if we're going to get back to this anytime soon.
Fair enough, but I don't think we want to get into doing a wholesale.
Yes. Chapter 18.32, satellite antennas. Can we regulate satellite antennas? Do we get to do that?
Do they even have satellite antennas anymore?
Not the big C dishes. Anyway, it's a question, so I'm not. I
It's
didn't mean to-
part of your code now, so we'll,
Okay, so we'll stick with it.
Yeah.
That's fine. I've moved to attachment 3 now, the bylaws. I appreciated the voting discouraged. And thank you for being interested in the range of suggestions. In the eligibility section, I appreciate that it's possible that we could get to the point where we don't have members of the public who are willing to serve on the Architectural Review Board who live in the city. That's the only circumstances, you know, qualified members who are living within the city. It's hard for me to envision circumstances where, other than that, where I would think that we should have someone who's living outside the city perform that job. It's not that I think there are people who live outside the city who couldn't do a great job, but I think the public would appreciate the vested interest of a resident. And I noticed in the staff report that the city manager gave to the city council, there was a very strong sense of that being his goal. So I hope that we can capture that, and I'm sure that you thought that through before you came out with that language.
that was, yeah, in that report to council, I actually prepared that, and I do want to note, this happens a lot, that you won't have a full local pool, and a lot of architectural advisory boards in other cities will have an architect sitting on the board who does a lot of practice in your area, which is why we put that additional language in. But I think we said something about prioritizing local, but if it's not strong enough, we can.
Yeah.
But we were concerned about having it be too tight and then not being able to fill your committee.
Speaking of tight, you, in the staff report, you were saying, I think you wanted to be flexible about when the meetings occur. And in Article 6, Part G, there's a discussion of regular meetings. So I guess the flexibility is just that they might, the expectation is these regular meetings might frequently be canceled due to lack of business. No?
No, that's a standard bylaw. The meeting is canceled if you don't have a quorum statement. But what I was, so the intent here, we don't know who's going to be on this group. And from every combination over time, you may need to make some adjustments so that these 3 people can routinely meet. And often they really like an early in the morning meeting because they're actually doing their professional practice for the city. Yeah.
Right. No, that's fine. I just, in the staff report, there was a reference to wanting flexibility for how that should work, and I was trying to figure out how that manifested itself in the bylaws. And I'm okay with this if you're okay. I just wanted to point out And then there were a series of places where, and I will just point them out, and you can identify whether they were errors or omissions or not, where there was a list of parties who might be receiving the input from the Architectural Advisory Committee. And sometimes the Planning Commission was in the list, sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it was the Planning Commission and the Community Development Director. Sometimes it was the Planning Commission or the Community Development Director. And so I just was lost on the conjunctions, and, you know, minutia defines the law. So I want to be sure that we have it the way you mean it.
So can I suggest, just in the interest of time? Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Polgar?
Very quickly, thank you for doing this, and I do appreciate that one thing that's very clear is that this is not they aren't making entitlements, because, and I do think that a key part of this will be making it clear to the applicants how the process works and the role of the advisory committee, because I think there's even confusion, like an understanding, like thinking about appeals. You're appealing the CDP, not their decision. There's no appeal of their decision, but I think it has to be very clear. So I am concerned about the heavy-handedness too, because having gone through a process with an advisory committee here and had them tell me I had to have green trim on my windows, and I didn't understand that wasn't actually that maybe if I decided not to do that, I could still get a CDP. So, you know, there's, you know, clarity would have been really helpful. So I do think that matters. The actual, you know, practical implementation of this has a big influence on how the applicants go through the process. But I'm very thankful that you've gone through this, so, and I am supportive.
Great. Commissioner Hernandez, do you have anything you want to add?
I want to echo Sarah's comments. I found that in the past, the Architectural Review Committee was very heavy-handed. They didn't have a lot of guardrails in place, and so people used it as a way to block projects of people they didn't like. And I want to make sure that as we implement this, we already have some new standards in place that help. But I want to make sure that we have guardrails that protect this from becoming like something that has too much authority and is too heavy-handed. That's my concern here. I really like Jimmy's point about trying to get a diversity of opinion and having them make recommendations versus having them have authoritative control over an individual applicant's project. So those are, again, there are some things that are good about the process, but overall, I felt like because we didn't have good guardrails in place at the time, it became something that was a little mercurial and unclear. And I'm very cautious about turning back the clock on something that we've managed to get away with in the last 10 years.
Great. Thanks, Rick. And yeah, good points. I'll just reiterate, I think Jimmy's point about, and staff picked up on this, about I'm more interested not necessarily in a recommendation or a yes or a no, but really understanding kind of the substance of the conversation and the considerations that they're going through in evaluating it. So not necessarily looking for a go, no-go type of decisions, but just, you know, sort of what's the content of their review. So with that, do we have a motion?
I move that we approve the resolution next in order, with the understanding that I'll provide my notes to the Community Development Director and give her a chance to mark it up to address those possible errors or omission.
And a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion approves. Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to Director's report.
Okay, we can do this fairly quickly. First of all, we really appreciate your effort for tonight. You had a huge agenda and it was quite varied, and thank you. May 28th, you have an interesting meeting coming up. The Half Moon Bay High School is 2 items. It's field lights as well as a cell tower project. You will also be reviewing a coastal development permit for a goat grazing fuel management program. It is a city project. And then we will have a really limited scope use permit for Pasta Moon. It's about alcohol sales, so it'll be focused on that. June 11th, we're queuing up McDonald's. They have a facade improvement and signage, and the Poplar duplex at 555 Poplar and Highway 1 is ready to come back to you. So for the 2 new commissioners, we invite you to come over and see that file, because there have been study sessions and quite a bit of backstory there. So I think it would help you prepare. Scott Phillips is the planner for that. On City Council next week, May 21st, the Carnoustie project is going to them. You saw that. You made recommendations on that subdivision, 8-lot subdivision with coastal development permits, so they'll be seeing that. June 4th, I'm hoping to bring this Architectural Advisory Committee item to council. Again, it has to be noticed, and there's a number of things with that. I just want to note, we're really, really busy right now. We're doing the budget, and we're doing this, and so I apologize if you're seeing gaps or lapses in your packet. It's
Let the record show that nothing I have said
okay, well,
anything of the sort. I'm very grateful.
It's quite a time. We're going to bring we're amending some of our fees, and that seems trivial, but it has to do with a number of practice things that are really important to your community members, the cost of simple permits, things like that, and of course the ADU ordinance resulted in revised process, so we're going to have fees that reflect that. We are also bringing all of our agreements forward for contract services as part of our budget process as well. So there's just a whole bunch of stuff like the CIP item that came through that floods through our shops in April, May, June. I'm going to see 2 projects tomorrow in director hearing, a remodel and a new ADU on Filbert, and the use permit for Shakespeare in the Park. They've been running on a 5-year permit. We'll look at how to, not a use permit, excuse me, CDP. I don't get to look at use permits, you do. May 29th, we'll have 537 Roosevelt. It's a new house. It conforms to everything, so I am choosing to take that one. I'm still trying to calibrate which ones I bring to you and which ones I keep. We're trying to provide a lot of customer service by making those calls, but if you have feedback from me on that, please share it. We were approached by 32 Jenna. I'm bringing all these up. I really think this needs to be in the public forum. 32 Jenna is a project that, believe it or not, you approved a year ago, and their coastal development permit is on the threshold of expiring. Excuse me, I'm not having an emotional reaction to that. But that said, they have now applied for a permit extension, which I am reviewing. It is for exactly what you've approved, and I am looking to see if we can make it contingent on that tree removal condition that was added, that was so important from the neighborhood agreement. So that's going on. So just wanted to let you know. We're going to be giving you and council, I don't know if we'll do it in a joint session or separately, but a Measure D update. It's been absolutely fascinating how the certificates have been flying out the door for ADUs and where we're at with that. So we're looking forward to talking about that. The other thing going on right now is there's state legislation that has come up that's crossing our path. AB 1236 passed in 2015, I believe. It was the Electric Vehicle Charging Station Open Access Act. It required that cities implement an ordinance. There was a date in 2017. I know our city attorney prepared that. We have a conforming ordinance in the Building and Construction Code, which is why you never saw it, because it was a zoning code. It's been fascinating because EV charging stations qualify as development, and the Coastal Commission staff guidance has been that they need CDPs. This state law makes it really clear that there are no exceptions, and the only thing we can review these for are public health and safety. And so we've agreed with that analysis. This required a legal review, and in fact the state offices are all talking to each other because they found the Half Moon Bay case to be rather thought-provoking. And you will see a project at the Bank of America parking lot for the level 3 DC fast chargers. It's, in our opinion as staff, we think they were thrilled because they picked a good spot. That lot is never full. It's perfectly located, one block kind of off of the heart and soul of everything, so it's walkable. The fast chargers are amazing, really, really powerful. We are going to require noise attenuation. That is a health and safety item, and so I can do that, but you're not going to see this. So I want you to know that there's going to be excavation and all kinds of things going on in that parking lot pretty soon, and it is exempt from a CDP, and they're pulling a building permit, and we're going to do everything we can to have it look great, get the landscaping back in, and have it hum quietly. And I think it's actually going to be wonderful. This is from Electrify America, which is an entity of Volkswagen. So you can see where this is coming from. They are required to install 484 of these throughout the country in a short timeline per their settlement, and 160 of them are going to be in California. They chose this site in their phase 1 implementation because they saw the EV use in the Bay Area and the intent of kind of creating linkages down the coast. So there's a lot of great stuff here. It's just different, and we're not used to this process. And if you have thoughts about it, please share. The other legislation that we've been working on improving our implementation of is the Water Efficiency Landscape Ordinance. We had a first reading last week with City Council to update that ordinance. You didn't see it because that sits in another part of the code. Second reading scheduled for June 4th. I bring it up to you not because you're reviewing irrigation plans, and we don't think that you need to, but you're going to see some changes in our conditions of approval and in our practice. We really have stringent reporting requirements associated with these landscape projects when the project involves more than 500 square feet of irrigated landscaping. And being a small town and being incredibly customer service oriented, staff has been very accommodating of our applicants, and we accept contractor plans, designer plans, architect plans, and we work out the details in the landscaping from these plans. We are going to have to get landscape planting and irrigation expertise to submit these plans to us. So it's going to make some of these projects cost more for applicants to get that design profession involved in the planning of it. I think it's good for the city in the long run. It's a little bit different from the way we like to work with everybody that we work with. So if you can back us up on that, we'd appreciate it. This is very important. It's an annual report that we put out, and it will help Bridget. This is straight in her alley there. I'm almost done. We are working on, we're also, the same thing happens at this time of the year as we get a bunch of grant opportunities. I can imagine that our chair has seen them sweep through where you work. The Pillar Point RV Park is potentially eligible for 2 different grants. We submitted a letter of interest for a priority conservation area grant, and that is through ABAG MTC. They have invited us to apply. So we are waiting for the Harbor District to make some decisions about the design so that we can finish the application, which is due very early in July. So we're working hard on that, and then we may pursue some other funding through Coastal Conservancy. The Climate Ready Grant is one that we're also studying, and we intend to make an application relative to the Poplar Gateways project implementation. There's numerous components of it that could relate to retreat. Not that many local agencies are ready to retreat, so we're hoping that we are eligible and competitive. Did that make sense? Yes, okay. It's late. We're maybe punchy. And then the last one is the SB2 grant. This is funding out of all this housing legislation that you're seeing going through the state. And the focus of this is housing production. Every city and county is potentially eligible. It's a non-competitive grant. For small cities, which is what we are, we could potentially get as much as $160,000. I'm not sure that every city is going to get the maximum amount, but that's the cap. And it's a planning grant, and you have to really make strong linkages between your project and how it will lead to housing production. It would be a shame to leave that on the table, so we're trying to figure out what fits best following work that we've been doing with you on your local coastal program update, as well as from City Council and their priorities with respect to housing. That seems like enough, and thank you for your listening and patience.
Very good. Definitely busy times. Any Planning Commission communications? With that, motion to adjourn.
Moved.
All right.
I'll second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good night, Rick.